All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Theo Phillips. I am a Senior Director of Community Partnerships at the Youth Development Institute at Memorial for Children. Thank you for joining us this morning. As Dennis said, this is an opportunity for folks to really ask some really important questions as they're developing their project plans right now and preparing for a great experience for their young people through the miracles and the wonders of project-based learning during summer youth employment this summer. So like Dennis said, this is a two-parter. We're going to start at 10. We're starting right now. We're going to go to about 12. We're going to take an hour break and then come back and go from 1 to about 3. Chances are we'll probably get out of here a little before 3, but we just want to make sure that we don't have to rush through any content and we give folks plenty of opportunities to ask the questions they need to ask. All right, so let's get started. So as you can see, because we have a pretty long day, we have a fairly long agenda. But as folks continue to join our session, please just drop your name and chat, name and organization in the chat. Like Dennis said, one of the things that we like to do over the course of these next couple of weeks as we get ready for SYEP is to continue to communicate with you guys and support you the best way we can. And sometimes we don't have the right contact information, so this is a great way for us to get that as well. So we're going to talk about the positive youth development and how that's connected to project-based learning. Then we're going to talk about project-based learning and work readiness as a strategy. Like, why are we doing PBL this summer with our 14 and 15-year-olds? What are we really preparing them for through this process? We're going to talk about the 4 C's. And the 4 C's is the method that we've been working with providers around, specifically around how you plan. Then we're going to look at the 7 project design elements of project-based learning. Really, what are the nuts and bolts that make up a project-based learning program? And then we're going to talk about expectations and roles, really like what's expected of you, what's expected from, what will you get from us, and what will you get from DYCD as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit around and wrap up the day talking about what YDI's PBL model is. One of the things that we do encourage and know that folks are doing is some folks have their own curriculum and have their own project designs already, how they want to do project-based learning. But what we want to do is offer folks that might not have done this before a little bit of a frame or a model to use as they go through the project-based learning process. All right, and then we're going to close out. Anybody have any questions? All right. Like Dennis said, we really do enjoy cameras, but we understand folks are going through enrollment and doing all those things right now, hiring staff that will probably end up having to watch this recording at some point and or attend one of our trainings at some point later in the future. But we do like to see faces, just like you all know in this virtual space. It gives us energy just as much as it gives you energy and makes you feel like you're participating as well. So as we start to see cameras come on, we really appreciate it. The more, the merrier. As some folks might be commuting and as you get set up, just join us. All right. So why are we here? Why are Dennis and I here? Who is the Youth Development Institute? Well, if you're familiar with Beacon programs, some 25 plus years ago when they came into existence, the Youth Development Institute was brought into life to really support the Beacon initiative, really to make sure positive youth development practices and principles were really at the center of the Beacon design. Over the years, we've evolved and we've grown, and now we work with not only Beacon programs, but also with all DYCD programs. But we also work with most city agencies that service young people. So that's DYCD, DOE, HRA, ACS, DOP. It sounds like I'm singing a song, but those are all the different acronyms of New York City. And most of them provide some level of service for young people. And really what we want to do is make sure that positive youth development practices and principles are there as well. So what do? We do a lot of technical support, right? And a lot of that shows up through training. And while we're training, a big piece of what we're doing is what we call little R research, right? We're really listening to how these things are playing out in the field. And we take that information, and when we talk back with these agencies, we use that information to help inform policy, but we also disseminate that information back into the field. So that's why we really hope that these things are as engaging and interactive with you guys as possible, because we hear things from y'all that help inform how we train moving forward. At the end of usually at the end of our summers, we have some level of focus groups where we talk not only to you guys, but we also talk to young people, just to really hear how the program worked for folks. That really helps us figure out how we adjust things moving forward. All right, so that's a little bit about who Dennis and I are and why we're here. And we're gonna start shifting towards project-based learning, but we're definitely gonna give ourselves an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit. But before we do that, we're gonna talk some real high-level stuff about what we're gonna be doing over the next couple of hours, right? So when we talk about project-based learning today, we're really talking about what is project-based learning, right? Like really being clear that project-based learning is full of voice and choice. While you might be selecting what the overall arching topic might be, what the project is and what they dive into is going to be totally led by young people. So we're going to do some more about understanding why PBL workforce, like why are we doing this as a strategy? And then last but not least, we're really going to talk about engagement and how do you create a project plan that's engaging not only for the participants, but for you as well, right? Because that's one of the things we really hope folks understand. Like project-based learning is a group effort led by young people, but you should really still enjoy yourself in the process as well.
And we don't want to rush too far past that. First and foremost, this is about youth voice and choice. Yes, we are facilitating something, but your plan is structured to make sure that what's at the heart of project-based learning, and we'll cover that, research, what's at the heart of project-based learning, young people making decisions, what's at the heart of project-based learning, young people working together. Those are the things that structurally you'll want to make sure that as you're listening today, that you're connecting the dot to that, because that's what's going to matter. This is not about today, your project plan. Today, this is about getting a clear understanding of what PBL is, so that when you go on to create your plan, you're really connecting the dots to what's at the core of PBL: research, youth voice and choice, and clear engagement in a group learning process. Any questions about that before we move? Excellent. And just so we're all on the same page about what this is, I see a lot of people here representing organizations that we've seen from the very beginning, right? So Yamilet and I like, hey, yes, I totally get it. Come to the refresher, Yamilet. You've been with us since day one, in-person training. Mordecai, like, great to see. We love seeing you guys. But again, this is about question and answer for people who have never participated before. So if that's not you, you are expected to participate in the refresher. All right. So just so we're separating between the two. We don't want this to be, you know, an exercise in futility for you. All right. Any questions from anybody else about what we're talking about, what our objectives are for today? And hint, hint, this is where the questions and answers start from the very beginning. All right, no questions. Here we go.
So here's our first question. Yeah, there you go. So really curious, did folks facilitate project-based learning last summer? And for those that are aware of what their situation will look like this year, will your program be in-person, virtual, or hybrid? This is the first opportunity for folks to really unmute themselves and bring their voices into the space.
I facilitated a project-based learning last summer. It's an environmental one that I created. It's a hybrid program. 4 hours of the week are online, learning about that topic. And each week we have a different topic. 1 week's climate justice, 1 week's food justice, 1 week's community organizing, soil health. And it's the same program that we're facilitating this year.
Excellent, excellent. And will that'll be virtual or in person, hybrid?
Hybrid. We do 2 classes, 2 hours each online, and then the rest is in-person field work each week so that they could tie in the concepts and the information we discuss in the class with actual in-person work.
Gotcha. That sounds fun. Some folks facilitated last year, and the program will be 25% in person. That's a really interesting percentage there. So 1 day out of the week, 3 times in person, 1 day remote per week. She will be facilitating a lot of hybrid. So that's good to hear. And somebody's 100% in person, both in person, some virtual, 4 days. Yep, hybrid. Okay. So, what's really interesting is, one of the things that some of you might have experienced last summer was Dennis and I were able to do some coaching with organizations throughout this process last summer. And I got an opportunity to meet with an organization that had both a group that was meeting 100% in person and a group that had been 100% virtual the whole summer. And what I saw on the day of presentations, which were all in person, was that the young people that had been in that virtual space the whole time really did struggle in terms of in-person relationships, right? While we understand that your program and the program hours that you guys are doing might be 100% virtual, if you can figure out opportunities and times, maybe for a trip, or some just level of just getting together for lunch every once in a while, giving them that opportunity, I think that'll be really valuable to building relationships and connections with folks. That's one of the things that we really want to stress. Go ahead, Dennis.
And we're just going to go ahead on and get with it early for those of you who are doing virtual programming. So when we look back, we have right now 83 people here. And of the 83, 6 people. Yep, people are starting to get where we're going, right? Like we got 80 people here and 6 cameras on. So the vast majority of you are participating virtually with a camera off. So when we talk about engagement, and just so we're all on the same page, we don't denote camera on as saying that you're doing what we're doing, but we do just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what it means to participate. And we're going to cover this a little bit more, but virtual programming and these boxes is what young people were talking about. And there are a lot of inherent things for us to think about as we talk about what PBL is and how it connects to us being able to see each other, to us being able to actively participate, and how you are going to find out whether or not your young people are actually doing the work. So again, there for the 70 some odd folk who are here who are doing whatever. Yep, a couple more cameras are coming on. Glad to see it, but like that's what it really becomes something for you to think about, because it's easy for us to talk to young people about what virtual programming means. It's harder for us when we look in that mirror and talk about what is virtual programming, what does virtual work mean for us. Thank you for all of you who are turning your cameras on, because like, yeah, this is what we're talking about. When we run virtual programs, yep, love it. Love to see people reacting and responding with what we would probably expect our participants to do when the facilitator says something to them about participation. So again, not calling anybody out, calling you into the dialogue, and we'll talk a little bit more about what virtual really means. As Theo said, we did a lot of little R research around cameras and participation, and we'll be talking to you more about that as we go on. And just so Victoria, so you know, like even the notion of what we're doing, right? Like eating and drinking, when we invite people into our homes, like, hey, that's what it is. I eat in my house, right? And I might eat while I work. So understanding that all of those things have implications for cameras being on, but not participation. So we'll want to talk about that as we continue to talk about this notion of in-person, virtual, and hybrid.
Excellent. Good job of getting some cameras on there, Dennis. We'll get some more on over the course of the day, I'm sure.
Let's see how long they stay on, because
Well, we're gonna do something that kind of, makes that happen. All right. So one of the words you're gonna hear from us, not only today, just this one time, you're actually gonna see this slide in like a couple times today, because we are really very clear that we have to be extremely intentional in the things that we do with our young people. Specifically when it comes to creating a space where young people that have never met each other can come into a space over the course of a very short period of time, get to know each other, come to a consensus on what they want to work on, and then deliver an actual product. So there has to be a lot of intentional things that we do. And one of the things that we want to do as well, right, because we're working with DYCD, right? And you guys are going to get site visits, just like we get site visits. It's almost like we're on a giant site visit right now because there's DYCD staff all in the mix right now. So one of the things we want to be clear on is that there's certain language associated with you being evaluated and the things that DYCD is coming to see. And we're going to bring some of that language into this space as well. Because we really do think, after working with this for the last couple of years, because we didn't always bring this stuff into the space, is that the real intentionality of creating this environment where project-based learning can actually thrive is really, really important, right? And we'll talk about the amount of time that you should be spending on this, the relationship building, before you really dive into, so what are we going to work on this summer as a group, right? Because they're not a group on day one. They're not a group on day two. There are a bunch of young people that have been chosen randomly to be in your program, right? So we have to be extremely intentional what we do, how the young people experience what we do intentionally. That's the organic piece, right?
And that part right there is where PBL starts. And just so we're all really clear, our PBL journey is not just about information. It is about group formation and how young people will experience the things that you do on purpose. So shifting, like connecting that dot, intentionality and on purpose is the same thing.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. So one of the things, as I said, we really do want to focus on this real intentionality behind developing relationships. And one of the things that we try to do is bring new things to the table, but sometimes we do realize that some certain activities really do fit the bill for what we're doing. So what we're going to ask folks to do is to participate in a little icebreaker with us. Take a moment, look at these M&Ms out here on the screen and drop in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, which M&M are you kind of resonating with this morning? What color M&M are you resonating with this morning? Just drop it in the chat. That's some blues, some yellows.
Got a brown siding,
Oh,
orange and red.
Okay. Okay. It's funny when there are this many people, it's almost impossible to keep up with what's going on because it's so many. It's happening so fast. Now, the important thing for you all to do is to remember which color you've decided to pick, right? So one of the things that we're going to do is we're not going to do that thing where you now have to tell something really embarrassing about yourself in front of the whole group. No. We're not going to do that because this is day one. So just like you wouldn't do that to your young people, we're not going to do that to you. But what we are going to do is put you in smaller breakout rooms, okay? And the color that you chose is associated with a question, all right? So here are our questions. Right? If you were brown, if you chose brown, if you could live in any sitcom, which one would it be? And if you're feeling brave, sing the theme song. All right, now listen. If you've ever done this PBL 101 with me or done this exercise with me before, I always consistently offer to sing the theme song along with that brave soul. So if you decide you want to sing that theme song, I will sing it along with you just for support. Right,
I
blue.
always consistently say, please don't do it, because it's too early for Theo to be singing with us. Oh my goodness.
All right, blue. If you had your own talk show, who would your first 3 guests be? Orange. If a movie was being made about your life and you could choose the actor or actress to play you, who would you choose and why? Red. If you had to wear a t-shirt with one word on it for 1 year, which word would you choose and why? Yellow. If you could keep only one kitchen appliance in your house, only one kitchen appliance, which one would you choose and why? And last but not least, green. If you could eliminate one thing from your daily routine, what would it be and why? And showering, come on, gotta keep that one in the routine. All right, so here we go, folks. Gonna open up some breakout rooms. Make sure you introduce yourselves. What organization are you from? Speak your name. Like I said, we will be with each other. Somebody's ready for some Living Single. Just so you know, John, I rewatched Living Single. That was like one of the first shows that I rewatched during the pandemic from the beginning to the start. So if you're ready for that, it's going down, John. But I'm going to open up these breakout rooms. You're going to have about 10 minutes in here to talk to each other. So there'll be about 2 to 3 minutes per person. Make sure you introduce yourselves, as Dennis put in the chat, and I will broadcast these into the breakout rooms. Right? See everybody on the other side. Is everybody back?
Yep, everybody back. We're good.
All right. So talk to me, folks. What was that like? What did we learn about people?
Hi, it's Shamani. I had a good group. I learned a lot. I had Marina in my group. If y'all was in my group, I could unmute. I don't remember everybody's name. But we did the color. We did brown. We did yellow, green. So I learned that for Marina, if she could be in any sitcom, she would do be in Everybody Hates Chris.
Oh, everybody hates Chris.
It was
Now
so
y'all
funny.
see what I mean.
And then we had another young lady. I know Marina, if you remember her name. She would have been in the Golden Girls. That one was a good one. And she was gonna be Dorothy.
Okay, so when we come back from break, I will have this song keyed up and we were ready to go. All right, that will happen today. Whew, I actually had a slide prepared for somebody the last time and they didn't come back. It was kind of messed up, but it's okay. I'll be ready for this one. Anybody else? What else did we learn? What else did we share?
We had somebody in our group give us like a little tip about like the kitchen appliance question. So she said she would keep her fridge because to like thaw meat, a good way to thaw meat is actually not with hot water, it's with cold water. So the fridge will hold it down. So I didn't know that. So that was cool to learn.
That's right. If you've ever gone to what are those? If you're a food safety person, they teach you that in the food safety class. I guess you've never been a food handler before. No? Anybody else? What else did we learn here?
In our group, we talked about that we'd like to pick more than one. We were put in the box, so we chose one, but each of us had a second, and some people seem to have had a third that they would like to choose. So, but everybody fulfilled the mission.
Excellent. So what was it like to do this activity with folks that you don't know? What was it like to do this with folks you didn't know?
I think it's interesting because like while these are strangers, you see that we have common interests. Like one person in my group mentioned for them, he had the movie question and it was Will Smith, and a bunch of us like Will Smith. And then another person had a question about the appliance, and it was the air fryer, and a bunch of us like the air fryer. So it was interesting to see, like, while we're all strangers, things that we have a lot in common.
Excellent.
Our group even liked the air fryer.
Who doesn't like an air fryer? Right. Go ahead, Victoria.
I think it's just very inclusive. You know, there's an opportunity for people to participate no matter what kind of information they want to share. So I thought that it was really helpful to kind of building rapport in your groups.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you.
So I just want to add, we start every one of our PBL Zoom sessions with an activity called Kahoot, which is kind of a similar one. And it's also, you know, the participants in a group, but they love it. And it's a really fun way to start them, to get them engaged, just like, you know, this activity.
Excellent, excellent, Dr. Castillo. You know, that's, you know, one of the things about even an activity like this, Victoria, you can do this activity every week and you can switch up the questions, right? And as we'll talk about group formation, you know, the questions can get deeper and deeper as young people start to develop relationships with each other over the course of the experience. So, and just from my own experiences, you know, I went out and did a visit during project-based learning, and because it was the first time all the young people had been in the space for the first time, the facilitator decided that that's when he was going to do an icebreaker. And the first thing the young people said was, "Wow, I wish we had been doing these the entire time. I would have really enjoyed doing something like this every week." So even the young people, they might be like, "Oh, we're doing another icebreaker." Oh, they actually really enjoy those things, right? Because it gives them those opportunities to develop relationships, see those commonalities that they have with folks, which allows the group to then move forward and accomplish the goals they need to accomplish over the course of the summer. So, you know, obviously you might want to switch up some of these questions for young people, but this is definitely an activity that we suggest folks, or something like this, that we suggest folks make sure that they build into their project plan, right? So you should be looking at your plan right now and saying, okay, so we do a whole lot of icebreakers and getting to know people in week 1. Where is that showing up in my plan in week 2, in week 3, in week 4, in week 5, and week 6, right? Because those things have to continue to develop, because the reality of this is, if I took 6 of y'all random people right now, and I was like, okay, so the next couple of weeks, we're going to work on a project, y'all would all be like, "Oh, I'm not doing this program," boop, right? So being clear that the relationship piece is what really does hold us together as we continue to do this. It's not the monetary piece for all these young people, right? Dennis, did you want to say something?
So I want to address a little bit of a process, and we're going to kind of jump into this as we continue on. So much about PBL is about research and discovery. Like at its core, that's what it is. And we just again want to remind everybody that what just happened is a level of research and a level of community building that allows young people to be able to be engaged. PBL, the work of the facilitator, is engagement, engagement, engagement. So when we think about what we're doing, it's not just what the young person is doing. If you notice, the entire time Theo is talking, I'm in the chat. The way that you have to construct your PBL is to continue to find ways of bringing your young people into the dialogue and continuing to allow them to figure out ways to discover, because that's what project-based learning is about. Project-based learning is about discovery. It's identifying something and then continuing to build on ways of learning new things. That's why when Theo said you could take these colors, leave the colors the same, because young people have learned a process, change the question. The question changes, process remains the same. We're doing the same thing. As Dr. Castillo said, they're playing Kahoots, they're doing it regularly, but there are different things in the Kahoots process that young people could discover, but the process is the same. They learn how to do that. And that's what's most important, that you have to develop a level of consistency in your program that allows young people to understand what they're doing and be able to activate it. And then you build on that, and we'll talk about how you build on that as you go throughout the summer. But project-based learning is about a group of young people, a group, not an individual, a group of young people exploring something. Does that make sense to everybody? like the notion of both ongoing exploration, but a group. So as we continue to talk about this, both in person and hybrid and virtual, we'll need to talk about what that engagement looks like. All right. As we move forward, the next thing for us to be really clear on is that there has to be, as we started with, an intentional strategy about how you get there. So some of what has to happen, you can move to the next part if you're ready, Theo, has to be all about how are people going to agree to work together.
Right. So I want to ask this question of folks. What's a rule? What is the definition of a rule? You have to define a rule. How would you define it? What is a rule? Go ahead, Rachel.
One mic.
So that's a type of a rule. But what is a rule by definition? Like, what does it do?
Like a rule, like something that you apply, like that you put in place to be followed.
Something put in place, something that you put in place to be followed. Okay, excellent. Anybody else? What is a rule? Yep, go ahead, Melissa.
It's a structure. It's basically
Structure. Okay, it's a structure. Who puts that structure in place?
I am, or whatever rules the facility has. So you put, basically, if you have a group, you, just as she was saying, the type of thing, the one mic, you basically, you find a fun way in terms of create the structure or to guide. It's a guidance as well.
Okay. So, okay, don't look at this. Don't look at this slide. Don't look at this slide. Right? I see you, Todrick. I see you, Todrick. Don't look at the slide. Don't look at the slide. Stick to what a rule is, okay? A rule is something that y'all put in place, as the young people would say, the higher ups put in place.
Or they could say a control.
Right, could control, not guide, right? No.
Yeah.
To control, right, and to monitor my behavior.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Where'd you go?
I'm
In the chat, chat, we got guidelines to keep order, regulated understanding of laws and expectations.
Regulated understanding of laws and expectations. Okay. All right. Todrick and then Richard.
For purposes of I like to call them circles of hope, rules to me are a suggestion of guidelines and agreements that I think collectively the group comes together, like the facilitator presented. I like to say suggest, and the group just agree.
Got it.
Everyone agrees.
The facilitator suggests, and then everybody just decides to agree. Okay.
Because okay. I like to I've learned that giving them a say makes it easier for them. It's not like you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, because everyone might have different house rules, like especially with the young brothers and sisters, like they're a lot different from the more mature crowd. I won't say older.
Hold on, don't ouch oops nobody out here. So I'm gonna stop you before the room comes and gets you. Okay. I'm gonna come back to what you're talking about, Todrick. Richard.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I work with older adolescents and young adults. So whenever we deal with behavioral control things, we always have to give them voice. It's part of positive youth development 101. Is that if they're young adults and adolescents, everything don't come from us to them. It's us together.
All right. Okay. Dennis.
I was just going to say what's really good about what everybody in this session is doing is that you are talking about from I'll say like best practice evolution of the way things can be. You've as what I think Todrick was talking about, and even what Richard just said, like this is the way we do it. But the real question that we were asking is like, what's a rule? Because rules and as was in the chat, like these laws and guidelines, like, there's real consequences to those things. And yeah, like most of the time they don't get followed because of where they come from. But we don't want to mislead ourselves or misunderstand what we're talking about, because a lot of programs have rules. A lot of programs have things that you say are non-negotiable, and young people don't really have a way of being able to impact them. So like all these things that we're talking about in the group, and notice I said programs versus the group. A lot of programs have rules that require young people to do things. And then inside the group, we're massaging that and we're trying to get buy-in. But we don't want to misunderstand that there are a lot of times these two things that are going on. Does that make sense to everybody? And is that something that everybody sees, right? Because we don't want to set young people up for failure inside of our room by saying like, well, in here you could do this. And then a young person steps outside. Nah, like there's a rule. Like, nah, and that rule is non-negotiable. And that young person is being sent home, or that young person is having some other consequence that's been put upon them because structurally the rule is in place. Like I like to talk about the like traffic, right? Like, you know, that Jersey Turnpike for any of y'all who like kind of drive that, or the Spring, like the speed limit is only suggestive as long as the officers aren't there to write me the ticket. So those of us who drive, like we understand that. We didn't agree that 65 was like the best speed limit. They told us that that was the best speed limit. So therefore, if nobody watching, I might exceed it a little bit because that's not what's best for me. Does that make sense? So when we talk about community agreements in programs, we want to make sure that we're thinking about how is the program gonna bring youth voice and choice into how things are gonna function within the program, not just in that room. Because what happens in that room sets the young person up for failure outside of the room if there aren't larger agreements. Any thoughts about that?
I saw Tiebreaker. I saw you unmuted yourself. I wasn't sure if you were going to add something to that, Tiebreaker.
I was just gonna agree when he said, does anyone agree? I was just gonna be like, yeah, I get it.
Excellent. So something happened during the last activity. And I'm not gonna shout it out, but a big part of what we talk about and I'll give you an example of those rules, Anthony, right? Like we'll have rules around participation, and we ain't really talk about that. So a part of what happened is that for some people, when we went into the activity, we put everybody into a breakout room. Now we haven't come up with our norms or our agreements in here, but if you didn't go into your room, I put you out. I put you back into the waiting room. People came back like, oh, why am I in the waiting room? Because we ain't talk about that. But there's something that could happen, and that does happen in programs. Because in the group, we might say this, but at the top, there might be a rule about participation. And if you aren't participating when we go on an activity, I might remove you. Just like as a rule, we might let it be okay for a young person to go sit off to the side and not do something, but then somebody else will come and say, oh, they're not participating, so I'm gonna put them out. That makes sense? So there's an example of a rule that might work in one space, or an agreement that might work in one space, but it doesn't port into another space. Richard?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something I think is important sometimes, because you guys were really talking about some really good stuff. One of the things that I think is important, and why it's important to include young people, is that there is in the collective agenda, they do have to recognize that there are some things that have to come from us, because we represent a larger reality that they are a part of. And so we have to be able to say, in the context of this program, this is a non-negotiable, and this is my input, right? And so what do you guys think about it? They could tell me, we don't like it, but if it's a non-negotiable, that's my input, right? From the perspective of programming. And the reason why that's important with young adults is that they have to learn to decenter. Everything is not about you all the time. They have to learn the larger society does not always conform to your desires, but that you have to fit into some norms and some structures. And that's part of adult development. So, you know, that I just wanted to throw that in there.
And that's excellent before Rachel goes, because here's the reality. This is still a workforce program. Knock, knock, knock. This is still a workforce program. And there are some great things that I would love to do that my employer will be like, yeah, nah, that's a non-negotiable. You have to be here and you have to do certain things. And as much as we want to give input, a big part of this PBL experience, which is why we talk about engagement, and getting young people into this is the direct connection in this experience to the work skills, some of those things that people talk about are soft skills that young people, all people, just so we're all on the same page, because it's not just young people that kind of don't get some of what Richard was just talking about. Many of us have colleagues that we scratch our head all the time, like, how they still got a job? Like, I just don't get it. Sometimes if you're that person that doesn't see that, that's because it's you. So we want to be really clear through this process that we are giving young people work skills that come with working with other people. And there's a way in which when we're working with other people, we have to be able to function. So these norms and these agreements are super important, because this, from the very beginning, is setting the tone for a specific way in which young people will work together. Rachel?
Yeah, I think it's important, because when I do like girl groups, I think it's important to allow the youth to add value, right? And to see the importance of also what their rules feel like. So even saying, what is something you would like to put in place, right? And allowing them to put that in place, but then them actually being able to feel when one of those rules are broken, what that could feel like. So that when you walk into a space where there are rules and you can't contribute to those rules, you still know what it feels like when those rules are broken. You're going to be able to add value and add structure, but why not allow and kind of coach the youth to see that they do add value, but also what it feels like when their rules are broken.
And thank you, Rachel. And what I want to add to this that's really important, right? And this goes back to what Dennis was saying about this being a workforce development program. One of the things that's really important, Anthony, this might also help you with your question. It's really important about what we're talking about when we're talking about norms, right? We're talking about what is the behavior that we actually want young people to display while they are with us in our space. Right? That is the difference between a norm and a rule. A norm generally speaks to the types of behaviors we want to see, while rules tend to speak to the behaviors we don't want to see. Rules are generally in the negative and say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing. Norms generally speak to when we're in this space, we're kind to each other. When we're in this space, we practice one mic, right? So they tell you what to do as opposed to what not to do. Young people go into lots of spaces all the time and they're told what not to do, which also keeps them from being engaged in the process. When we're talking about norms and we're creating these agreements as a group, we're talking about what are the behaviors that we want to see as a group as we work together, right? Like we ask questions when we don't understand things. We seek for understanding before being understood, right? Those are the types of things when we talk about norms, because those are the types of skills, I see you, Anna, those are the types of skills that once young people leave our programs, they're able to apply those skills other places. The don't do this doesn't necessarily apply when they go somewhere else. Does that make sense to folks about what we're talking about? The fundamental difference between norms and rules is norms tell us what to do, rules tell us what not to do. Anna?
I just wanted to add on that when we consider making the switch between having a set of rules and having norms. What we do on our end when we're doing our project-based learning is we just restructure them completely and we call them community agreements. And so that could be anything from me already having a set of community agreements, or we can ask the class, okay, what does everyone want to be a role in this classroom? What is everyone's comfort levels? One thing that comes to mind is like, okay, well, I, as a person, don't personally like people in my personal space. So maybe one of our community agreements can be that we respect each other's space and we keep our hands to ourselves, and everyone can kind of communicate about that and decide if that's a community agreement everyone agrees on. And then that way they're more included in the process of the structure, as opposed to just, oh, this was already set in place and now I just have to follow these rules.
Excellent, excellent. And even with us as facilitators, you know, we have a set of norms that we have that we like to offer to the group, but that's what it is. It's an offer to the group, and we ask the group if that's something that will actually help them function, right? So those are the things to really keep in mind. It's okay to have things in mind that you want to put in place for those community agreements, but you have to ask the group if it will actually help them function, right? And the other piece that's really important about norms in these community agreements is it's not something that just gets visited during that first week, right? It's something that should be revisited at the start and the top of each day to remind folks, right, you're not at home. You're not on the block right now. You're here. Here, this is how we operate and this is how we function. Just a reminder, right? We work with groups over the course of 10 weeks. If I emailed one of them right now and I was like, yo, can you tell me any of the community agreements? They'd be like, have fun, right? They know that one, they remember that one, right? But even for adults, the fact that we have to review these things on a weekly basis even speaks to the importance of how we need to make sure young people also understand this process, right? And it's not just it, and the difference between norms and rules are, rules get set, norms live, right? Norms shift and change as the group gets to know each other, right? So what they might not have wanted to say is an agreement about how they work. Something could happen in that group that forces them to have to add another norm because they might not have known each other as well during the first week as they do during week 3 and week 4. Right? So there might be different. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead, Theo. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to just say, so there might be different norms that are needed to guide the group. So you should constantly revisit, hey, especially if you set this in week 1 and you know you have folks that join SYEP up to what, like week 3, right? So even though you know you still have young people coming in, making sure they're aware and they have an opportunity to either add something to the norms or offer something to the group also continues to build that buy-in.
And for those of you who are planning right now, just want to be really clear. If you don't get this part right, your summer is going to be long and arduous. Just want to be real clear. If you don't understand how to engage your participants in creating the environment, and we're going to talk about this right later, but nothing else will matter, because at the heart of your PBL is a group of young people who are researching a project. So if you don't talk to them about how they're going to do that, and you don't get them to agree to that, at the end, there has to be there's a presentation. There are things that you know need to happen in weeks 5 and 6. If you don't prepare in week 1 and make sure that young people understand what's going to happen in week 5 and 6 and come to an agreement about that and continue to build group, it's going to be a struggle. So we spend time talking about this now because this foundationally is the only way to get you to the end. So please don't tune out this part of the dialogue. Everything else, it builds off of this. And fundamentally, the difference in between rules and agreements is where you have to start. Because as we shared, rules tell young people what not to do. They don't tell them what to do. So if you don't start by telling them what to do, and all you say is don't do that, you'll be doing that all summer. Don't do this. Don't do that. That's all you'll do. And you'll never get to where you need to be. So as this group, and we can't stress enough, you're talking about doing programming virtually. You're talking about doing programming hybrid. You're talking about doing programming in person. Newsflash, you're going to have rules that you've identified, and then norms and agreements around that for all three spaces. And that has absolutely nothing to do with what they're going to be researching. So as we continue right now in this space, we don't have anything about how people are going to participate. Cameras on, cameras off, use the chat. Like, we haven't talked about any of that, but people are participating. So our expectation in this professional space, if we were going to be working together past today, we'd have to establish that. Because there are a whole bunch of people who are here, we think, who are doing something, we think, but we don't know. So you're gonna need to make sure that you structured your agreements with your young people and your rules. Because some of you, your organization have rules around what young people have to do. Rules. It's not up for debate. So if you aren't really clear about that, then how do you get your young people to do the other things that they need to do? Again, during an activity, I removed people who did not go into the room. I put them back in the waiting room, which for some places would signal that the person isn't working. And when I say work, I don't mean like, we know this isn't an hourly thing. It would mean that you're not doing the research. It would mean that you're not doing your project. It would mean that you're not meeting an expectation. People would need to know that in advance so that they can make a decision about what to do. Does that make sense? So we've been going a little while. One of the things that we want to also be able to do is make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. They're still using the computer to a point where we used to, even between this session, between 1 and 2, we would show an hour-long video, again, so that people would be able to hold on to their hardware. So YouTube has a bunch of timers. We actually take this one right from YouTube. So you can punch, and you just punch in the time that you want to use the timer. So if you're looking for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, they have all different types of timers. Share screen, share volume, and then there you go. All right.
And I noticed that somebody said, perfect theme for today, right? Like, yeah, may the 4th be with you, right? So there was also a level of intentionality behind me picking the Star Wars related video because it went with the theme, right? So like Dennis said, if you can also just add like springtime, puppies, kittens, whatever you want to add to it, and it'll show you a short 5-minute timer, 10-minute timer on those things. And like Dennis said, not only does it help secure it, but also folks are less likely to get up and walk away, right? And yesterday we actually showed something on like a short video on like a quick 5 minutes on like how to be more productive, right? We were doing something on goal setting. We were doing a session around goal setting and project planning, and then it was like, so let's make sure that even the break video was still relevant to the topic, right? So that's some other ways to make sure young people stay locked in and engaged with what you're doing.
And Anna put that there are other workarounds that you could download that would actually prevent commercials and other things from popping up. So thanks, Anna. One of the things that we like to be able to do during this session is that if you have a resource that you could share with another person, this is a great networking opportunity. So if you hear something and there's something that you're doing, and a number of you, and Anna just dropped it in the chat, that's what I'm talking about. If you have a resource that you think can help, please, by all means, drop it in. And I will tell you, don't be surprised if you come back to another one of our sessions and we're using it, because we believe in that flattery. All right. So we just want to make sure before we move on past this notion of norms and agreements, and the connective tissue to any rules that you might have, everybody's on the same page, because this foundationally is where you have to begin. You have to start with engagement, and you have to understand that you're asking young people to do something that, as much as we think they do it all the time, one of the research things that we found is that they don't. And the other part of this is, if you don't make it unique to what you're doing, here's the other thing that we know. Young people will think about PBL as being exactly what they do in school. And our challenge is to also differentiate learning in that space. So you having clear agreements about what you're doing, that you intend to be different from what happens in school. You have to have other rules and agreements. If that experience, and I'm not like knocking what they do in school, some of them are amazing, but you need to be really clear about what your expectations are and how they're going to function. Theo?
I just want to also just add something, because Dennis and I were talking about this during the break. Prior to this being virtual, this was a 2-day, full day in-person training. So it went from like 9 to 5, 2 full days. And we figured out how to pack it into 4 hours in 1 day. And one of the things that we want to just stress is, because over the next hour, over the next 40 minutes or so, Dennis and I are going to be doing a lot of like, we try our best to model what these things should look like. So when we're bringing tools like the timer and other things like that into the space, that's us being able to model as much as we can in the limited time that we have. I say that because for one of the few moments in times, we're about to like really just give you information right now and stuff to think about as you plan.
Excellent. So as you plan foundationally, this notion of intentionality is where everything needs to go. All right. Now, just because we're going to start talking about things, it doesn't mean that we don't welcome dialogue. So if you have a question, please feel free, raise your hand, drop it in the chat. Like, we're still going to take care of all of those needs as we promised in the very beginning. So just because we're going to jump into stuff, it doesn't mean that you don't have space to ask questions. So what we want to start by saying is that it's our intent in our programming to utilize the positive youth development framework as the core of what you do. And in doing that, it's super important that foundationally you're thinking about this intentional pro-social approach to engaging your young people. PBL is designed to be a pro-social way of making sure that your young people have constructive ways to be able to recognize, utilize, and enhance the strengths and assets that they bring to program. PBL is an asset-based approach. We are talking to young people about things that they already know, talking to young people about being able to promote as an outcome the acquisition of some skills, some abilities, and some real attitude adjustments. And yes, Anthony, everything that we're talking about today, you will have access to, both a recording of what we've done, as well as in other folders, we'll have content. And all of this DYCD specific stuff, these frameworks, actually lives on the DYCD website. So you can also find these frameworks there. And we strongly encourage you to use them, because at their core, they are designed to really help us foundationally structure our programs so that we're able to move young people into being able to really participate in a meaningful way. So what you see inside these boxes are sort of like categorized 8 specific things that DYCD promotes as what is at the heart of your program structure. But what's important is that not only are you looking at the topic, right? That you don't just see something like positive social norms, but that you read how it's described. Because sometimes there's a disconnect in between what we might think positive social norms means and what DYCD is talking about. So when we're building out our programs, we want to make sure that our programs are engaging our young people in the creation, and this goes back to what we were just talking about, the creation of a respectful environment that involves a respect for diversity and culture in activities. And we say, let's take that a step higher, our program, right? How is our program doing that? And then at its core, are we doing things like making sure that there are supportive relationships? And supportive relationships is not from a youth perspective. So DYCD describes it in one way, but young people talk about supportive relationships is when you recognize that something's wrong or something has happened with them, and you can approach the young person. So for example, if all year being subjective, all summer, you see a young person, and I'm going to say right now, like one of the faces that I see Monique, right? So Monique has her camera on. Monique always has her camera on. All of a sudden, Monique's camera goes off. What happened? Am I conscious that for the last 2 days of activity, Monique hasn't turned her camera on? Am I going to Monique and I'm like, hey, I'm checking in as a part with you. What's happening? I recognize that something different has changed. Now, at the same time, Victoria, whose camera is off, maybe Victoria's camera all of a sudden starts coming on. Am I paying attention to that? And then talking to Victoria about, hey, I know that your camera's on. What's going like? Are you somewhere different? Or maybe backgrounds have changed. How tuned in to what's going on in the lives of your young people are you through these boxes? Of course, when you're in person, it looks different. Of course, when they're going from in person to virtual, you may see in a hybrid space a young person act one way when they're in program. Maybe they're really outgoing, they're vicarious, they're like, oh, they're chatty all the time. Yeah, you go put them on camera, something different starts happening when they're not there, when they're in that virtual space. So you're paying attention to that. And the reason why is because our programs are designed to give young people an opportunity to belong. We want to make sure that our programs help young people feel like they're a part of something special. And more importantly, that they're an important part of the program. And we do that through the creation of these appropriate structures. When we talk about appropriate structures, we're talking about making sure that the activities that we're doing are age appropriate. We're talking about that there's a great balance in between the way we bring information. We're using different learning styles. We're making sure that young people are actually participating at times in the development of activity. An activity could be like the development of norms ongoing. The development of activity could be like maybe there's something that you started doing in the beginning that you let a young person do over the course of time. And more importantly, that there's a real way for a young person to evaluate and give you feedback around what they're doing. Those things create appropriate structures. Now, when we're doing PBL, we already know that there's an integration of the community, of the family, and because some of our young people may still be in school during the summer, that we're bringing that in to our program. We're at least conscious of it, and that we have a mechanism that allows us to engage parents and other caregivers, as well as the community, in what we're doing. For your PBL, this number 5 is it, because at its core completion, there's a project that is supposed to be presented to community, to other stakeholders. So integration is what you're talking about. That's what's at the core. So you want to begin in the beginning with number 5 in mind, because at the end of the journey, number 5 is what it was all about. Now, when we think about 2 other ones, both 6 and 7, opportunity to make a difference and opportunity for skill development, PBL 101. We're doing those 2 things. Young people are learning how to do things. So our structure is designed to make sure that a young person is acquiring skills, gaining knowledge, and getting and recognizing that their attitudes that they bring towards doing things have to evolve. Again, this is about work. So those competencies that are associated with what we would call soft skills, that sometimes are the greatest struggle for a young person, are what we're talking about. So being able to think about how you use PBL, how you use this group to help that young person develop those skills is what's again, something that is foundational in how your program design has to be thought of. And then making a difference. Like young people need to explore in this program careers. Did everybody catch that? They need to explore careers. So when you think about the work from a week to week basis, you need to be thinking about what are the careers and the jobs. And that we're all here in a space where we're expected to know the difference in between a job and a career, and helping young people understand the difference between a job and a career. Everybody tracking that? We're all on the same page about the difference in between a job and a career. Anybody need me to dive into that anymore? Because PBL as a workforce engagement strategy is about making sure that they can set goals to accomplish something. That's why you're planning with them. That's why you're teaching them how to plan that final event so that they can track through, what are my goals? What are the actual objectives of my program, of my activity? Now, none of this will happen if young people aren't physically and psychologically safe in your space. None of this will happen if young people are not physically and psychologically safe in your space. And your space, for those of you who are doing hybrid programming, means that there are things that are going to happen when a young person is in person that we all know look different when they're online, and vice versa. There are a lot of internet heroes, a lot of people who are very brave in what they say in these boxes and in other spaces online. You have got to be able to develop a clear plan and agreements around how you're going to keep everybody safe and keep young people from hurting both themselves and each other, both physically and psychologically. How are we going to manage conflicts that arise online? These young people are expected to work together. How are you going to manage conflicts that may start in the group and take themselves online? Is a part of foundationally what you have to think about as you're developing your plan. Project-based learning, both in person, hybrid, and virtual, requires you to think about these 8 things in the development of your approach for your summer. So Anna has talked about how can we address conversations about diminishing opportunities for actually stable careers. So much of that lives in the exploration of careers. What is a career? And that's why I asked that question. How do we fundamentally understand the difference in between a job and a career? And then, because project-based learning is about a young person identifying an issue or a challenge, and now being able to connect the dot to what are people doing either in their community or in the world that's designed to impact that. So when we think about a job versus a career, we're talking about what is the issue and challenge that the young person has identified. And then being able to think about and work with them to research what are the jobs and careers that are associated with that issue and or challenge. And that's where research is so important, Theo.
And the important part about this is it's something current, right? So since it's a current problem, those career pathways and things associated with whatever issue that they're bringing up to the light should also still be very current and very relevant to actual stable careers that are very beneficial to them, because they've already identified this topic as being beneficial to them, right? The other piece about this, especially as we're doing stuff in this virtual space, we're also continuing to build what we call those 21st century skills with our young people just by operating in these boxes and manipulating the computers and operating in this space, right? Because the reality of this is, I don't think this is really going anywhere, folks. So we'll be Zooming from now until they come up with the teleport devices or whatever, you know, that the Jetson stuff. But we'll be doing this until they come up with that.
And again, when we're planning, and this is where planning comes in, right? When we're planning our theme up front, there's research that we need to do about the careers that just exist in our communities, careers. So there's work that we need to do, Anna, to really be able to identify what are some, even if and yes, it's a perspective, but what are some of those stable careers with benefits and reasonable pay that young people can explore outside of the things that they care about? Now, again, being really clear, there's some stuff that we have to do in preparation. We know what we've got to teach them. We've got to give them information that allows them to do other things. And yes, some young people do have interests and they don't know about the career. That's the research. They don't know that this leads to a job. I might want to be a sports person, because that's what we hear all the time. There are so many jobs, there are so many careers that exist within any individual sport. Things in the medical field, things in public relations, things in marketing, accounting. There are so many careers that exist that we have to be able to help them explore that. So how do we do that? So one of the things that YDI did, and Theo talked about how we've been doing this from the beginning, is create a virtual PBL experience. YDI's virtual PBL experience is 100% grounded in a positive youth development approach that supports young people as they look at real world situations. But again, the intent behind looking at the real world situation is to really help them develop skills associated with collaboration, problem solving, and critical thinking. And at its core, we are still making sure that we're trying to help young people not only get a job, but keep a job. We're talking about how do we help them develop key employability skills. Now, because project-based learning is also in this designed to be a youth-driven approach, but youth-driven doesn't mean that the young person is alone. We're talking about how do we help a young person develop a relationship where they can co-design and co-construct how they learn. That's a part of the journey. Co-design and co-construct how they learn. Who are they co-constructing that with? Each other and you. At its heart, YDI thinks about and recognize that young people do everything through relationships. When we talk about doing everything through relationships, we're talking about this sense of connectedness. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into what connectedness means from a YDI perspective. But we want to be clear that young people are looking to master something. They're looking to get information. But in order to do that, we think about this notion of preparation. Young people have to be prepared to do the things that we're talking about. So in order for a young person to problem solve, if that's what we want them to do, we have to prepare them about how to problem solve. That's something that we know in advance. So we know that we're going to have activities that teach them how to do that. We want them to make decisions together. We have to have activity that is designed to teach them about how to make decisions together. All of those things live in a preparation space. And then finally, this notion of young people really wanting to do something, helping young people gain confidence through opportunity to really impact the world around them. That's why we talk about this PBL as a look at an issue and a challenge that the young person cares about. We get it that as organizations, you've got a theme, but you've got to figure out how to bring the voice of caring of the young person into it, because here's what's real. We all know if they don't care, they're not going to come. It's not enough money, as Theo said, as we all have said. So if you just come up with a theme and you want to kind of make everything happen, you're going to notice attendance in day 1 and attendance in day 5 could be very different. And certainly by the time you get to day 15, you might be in there by yourself. So thinking about how you structure your program so that young people can thrive is what's key. Thriving is the connection between connectedness, preparation, and authentic opportunity. It's the outcome that we look for. When we talk about connectedness, what are we really talking about? And here's where the rubber meets the road in your program. Your program, not your activity, has to center on this notion of connectedness. And that means that every place, the people and the program and its environment are intentionally trying to cultivate the following. You're trying to cultivate a sense of caring. You're trying to make sure that you are placing at the center of everything that you do relationship building. It's all about developing a relationship between your young people and the staff. Through caring, you can develop a sense of trust. And that trust is going to be 100% about how you create an environment that promotes a connection between young people and each other, young people and the staff, and young people and the program. Because when you have a caring and trusting space, that's how young people can feel like they belong there. Belonging and being both either in this box on the days that we're there, in person on the days that we're there, and this blend between the two in our hybrid programming is critical. The young person has to feel like this is a place where I belong. And then we got to translate feel like into it has to be a place where the young person belongs. That's a dramatic pause. It has to become a place where your young people belong. That's why having a clear understanding of the rules and the agreements, because a lot of places where young people are really not designed for a young person to be there. They're designed for us to do our work. And that is not the same as a young person belonging. Remember, connection is critical. So safety speaks to both physical and psychological. If we're doing things, we have practices that don't make a young person feel like they belong. They're subtle, they're implicit, but they're not, no one's saying anything. But every time a young person walks, somebody closes the door in their face. Every time they're a little loud, someone shh. That doesn't create a space where the young person feels safe. And ultimately, they will quickly feel like they don't belong because they don't trust anybody, and they certainly know no one cares about them. See how they're all connected? Because connection is critical. And the notion of reciprocity, it's not just a place where you're going to give something to the young person. What does the young person get to contribute to their own learning and to that space? Have we thought about young people? Do we want young people to be able to contribute to how our space is, how it's defined? Or are we just a place for them to come in, have their lunch, and then leave? So being able to understand this notion of connectedness is critical. Now, at its core, DYCD has provided 4 things from its framework that can help you with that. And those 4 things are simple. All spaces have to be physically and psychologically safe. We've talked about what that means. We create a sense of physical and psychological safety, in part by ensuring that young people are in a space where they've been engaged in the creation of positive social norms, where the adults and the space and the program are full of supportive relationships. And remember, it's a recognition of the different cultures that are being brought together within our young people and in the community. And we are respectful of those cultures including the culture associated with just being a young person. Young people and adults don't always think about things in the same way. So structurally, we have to be able to think about youth culture and be able to connect the dot. Now, I want to be really clear. We're also making sure that this is a work preparation, right? So we're talking about when things are out of alignment, this is about work. But we've got to model that. We can't talk about this is about work for a young person and they look around and see one of our colleagues doing something that we tell them they shouldn't do, because you can't do that at work. Anybody ever see that? Raise your hand if you have. We tell young people they shouldn't do something and one of our colleagues is doing the exact same thing that we just told them they shouldn't do in the world of work. Yes. So we know it happens. So we have to be really clear about the integration of all elements of the school community, because the stakeholders, including the family, because again, our families are stakeholders in this process. So as we are developing our program, foundationally, this is what has to be at the center of everything that you do. This is the foundation. We're going to get to PBL and what PBL is, but we make sure that we're going to spend all the time making sure you understand this. Because as I said, if you don't develop your plan with these 4 things in mind, your summer will be long. It's going to be long anyway. But if you don't have this at its core, the ability to really get young people from where you want them to be to where they need to go, because remember, it's not about just getting a job, right? We want to get them jobs. That's where we want them to be. But ultimately, where we want them to go is we want them to be people who can keep the job. That's what this is. So learning things like being able to collaborate with others, learning things about how to problem solve, learning things like critical thinking and decision making. Those are key employability skills. Being able to Google something, yep, they need to be able to do that. Being able to create a PowerPoint, sure enough, they need to be able to do that. But guess what? They get those skills at times in other places. But what people aren't talking to them about, that your group-based, project-based learning is capable of teaching them if you are intentional, is how are they going to do those things together in a group environment? Does that make sense? So fundamentally, that's what's at the core of your PBL. So we like to make sure that when we think about project-based learning, and we can go to the next one, Theo, and then we'll be good. That when we think about project-based learning, we're talking about defining a process that will really allow young people to connect to each other. This afternoon, we're going to really step into that space. But as we go to lunch, we want to leave you with this thought. As you think about project-based learning, I want to bring those thoughts that you have about project-based learning to top of mind. I want to make sure that we transition now that we understand what our program has to be to really step into project-based learning. So really quick, when we think about project-based learning, what comes to mind? What comes to your mind when you think about project-based learning?
Transparency.
Transparency. Thank you. Younger youth. Learning while doing. Excellent.
I got it, Dennis.
Okay.
Support.
Support. Community. Cooperation. Experiences for youth. Learning through projects.
Opportunity.
Excellent. Opportunities, relationships. Excellent. What's super important about the list that's developing and the things that you're saying right now, if this is our end goal and we're thinking about that, we have to develop a plan to accomplish all of that. So our structures that we already talk about Now that we understand that this is what we want to happen, this is what we want to see, and Deanna's facilitating, our young people to have hands-on lifetime experiences, inspiring young people to do things that they love. Now we understand the structure of our program. So yes, we need to be able to create an environment where these things can happen. Amazing things that are associated with project-based learning, amazing things that are associated with the actual skills and abilities that you need to teach your young people. It will not happen without foundationally you establishing an environment where these things can occur. And these things can occur in a group environment. And that part is where sometimes it gets sticky. This isn't an individual young person, it's a group. Theo?
Yeah, and just to close out before we go to lunch, like Dennis said, we've dedicated literally the first half of this training solely to speak about the importance of this environment piece, right? You can have the greatest project plan, you can have all the most amazing co-locators coming in to bring all sorts of great things in that your program wouldn't normally have. But if you don't set that foundation where young people want to show up, you're going to be asking yourself, why don't they want this service? Why don't they want to come to all this great stuff we're offering them? Because you haven't spent that time developing relationships. It's really, really fundamentally very important to project-based learning and working with young people in general. All right. So we closed out by talking about what project-based, what comes to mind when you think about project-based learning. Definitely go enjoy some food, right? Nourish yourself. Don't use this hour to transition somewhere if you can help it. Really take care of yourself. We will see folks back here at 1 o'clock. Same link as this morning, nothing any different. And we will really dive into the fundamental pieces of project-based learning. All right. Appreciate you all for your time this morning, and see everybody in una hora.
Una hora.
Una hora. I got it backwards. See, there we go. I'm working on it.
Said, I am Dennis Carter, and I am the Chief Program Officer at the Youth Development Institute at Ramapo for Children, and I'm joined today by my colleague who can't find unmute.
And good afternoon. Welcome back, everybody. Theo Phillips, Senior Director of Community Partnerships.
Excellent. We are going to be diving right in. One of the things that we strive to do is get you in and get you out. And that's actually a best practice, right? Like, we don't want to have anybody just sort of being somewhere just for time and timing's sake. Something for you to think about when you're thinking about how you're going to structure your program. Remember, yes, there are hours associated with it, but it's all about engagement. It's all about the activity and making sure that young people are coming in and getting what they need, getting their needs met, and really learning these professional work-related experiences that are all about career exploration, that are all about the fundamental difference in between, as we left off with, like this, having a clear understanding of the difference between a job and a career. All right. So jumping into it, Theo, you want to take us through?
Yeah. So we are going to show you a video right now that explains kind of what project-based learning is. One of the things that we'll put to the group, right? Really put out to the group, to the community, is when we're looking for videos and representation of some of these things that are happening in our communities with young people that look like the folks that you service, it's very difficult for us to find actual video footage of young people doing project-based learning. And as we moved into the virtual space, everybody was doing this virtually, so they would have only been able to send us, screenshots of Zoom. But as folks are starting to do some more hybrid, some more in-person stuff, we really hope that folks are capturing some of the things that are happening in your classrooms, because we'd really love to start getting some footage of what project-based learning looks like in practice, specifically with young people from our communities. So if anybody's interested in taking that up and providing us with some footage, that'd be great. And we can talk about that offline at another point, but definitely keep that in mind. All right, cool. So what is project-based learning?
Today, we're going to start a new project.
Teachers and their students have been doing projects since forever. More and more are doing project-based learning. So what's the difference?
That's a great question. Let's start off by reviewing.
Projects are typically limited in scope and duration. They're a good way for students to work with content they've already learned.
Flip to the paper that says sundial.
In project-based learning, students learn through the project.
Interesting.
They address a real-world problem, a driving question, one that can't be Googled and has no single right answer.
We were talking about how can we prepare for Atlanta's change in weather.
Students have voice and choice in PBL, some input into how they'll answer the driving question.
Does anybody think they might have some ideas?
So they gain ownership of their learning.
So those questions led to our investigation.
They collaborate in a process of sustained inquiry, lasting more than a few days.
We've got a whole lot of work to do.
They reflect on their learning through discussions, formative assessments, and critiques of their peers' work.
We are going to take a look at one of your friends' work today.
And then revise their work based on those reflections.
On the sheet. Okay, there we go. We got it.
You can
High five!
The final product is shared with an audience beyond the classroom. Maybe that's professionals in a related field.
I appreciated how thoughtfully you responded.
Or it could be the kids in the class next door. When students spend an hour exploring the 4 forces of flight by crafting a Mars lander out of paper, that's a project. When they spend a month simulating a Mars landing, analyzing the math and physics at work, and discussing their work with real aerospace engineers.
And it sounds like you've done a little bit of testing to see if that works.
Yeah.
That's project-based learning.
Capiche? Capiche.
Research shows that rigorous PBL can result in higher engagement and deeper content knowledge.
You're rocking it. Keep it up, okay?
Learn more about project-based learning at edutopia.org.
So in that moment there, was anything that stood out as folks were watching that video? Anything resonate with folks? And Derek, please be safe as you drive, my friend.
Want some pasta and shells? No, they didn't.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Castillo.
So what I did notice and is really important to me is that all of the participants were enjoying themselves. And we really like stress that importance so much because it is summer and we want to make sure that they are engaged, but they're also enjoying themselves. And that came through in those videos.
Excellent, excellent. And like Dennis said, we want to do our best to be intentional about how we're reaching our outcomes without making it feel like school. Anybody else? Anything else stand out for anybody?
This is Sharita Ali. I wanted just to say, I think it stood out to me that there were no right or wrong answers to what they were going to identify and work on. This, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, Excellent, excellent. You know, it's
So
go ahead.
I just want to, can I add to that? Because that was something we struggled with. Because we have a lot of teachers run our PBLs for us. And so how are they conditioned? It's right or wrong. And we would say to them, it's not right or wrong, it's engagement. That's what it's all about, and that they learn. So if you know, one of the participants does something and it doesn't work out, then we use that as a learning experience and how can we improve it?
And a big part that we like to connect to that is that it's also about this notion of growth mindset, right? Like when we talk to young people about things being that they've done in a deficit or a fixed mindset, it actually does not encourage them to do what we want them to do, and that is to recognize that this answer that they came up with may not be the right answer, but what they've done is moving them in a path. And because it's all about research, teaching the young person how to research and how to compare and contrast different answers allows them to be able to discern for themselves as to whether or not something is right or wrong. So remember, we're talking about project-based learning as research and discovery. So this notion of right or wrong as a part of project-based learning is all about how do we discover, how do we arrive at the conclusions that we arrived at? Does that make sense?
And we're also talking about this notion of agency, right? And Michael just put in the chat that their opinions matter, right? And a big part of project-based learning is helping young people in certain instances find justice, you know, in certain parts of their community, like the young man that mentioned all the types of you know, the environmental justice stuff that they do. And I think, you know, over these last couple of years, specifically while we were in lockdown, some of those injustices became very, very clear to our young people. So really being like understanding that a big part of this process is also helping young people find their voice and find their ability to do a lot of those skills that we ask them to do or that we expect to be done in the workplace. Right. So let's dive back into it. What is project-based learning? So according to the Buck Institute for Education, project-based learning is a teaching method in which learners gain specific knowledge and skills by working for an extended period to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. You know, a big part of project-based learning is the ultimate outcome shouldn't be a yes or no answer. Right? It shouldn't be anything that the young people can simply Google, right? It's something that, as we were just talking about, with there not being a right or wrong answer, it's about young people being able to research, right? And to be able to figure out if they do take a stance on something, how to then justify what it is that they have come to the conclusion about, right? But as we talk about it being the tool, one of the things we'll also talk about is the importance of like reflection, right, in this process. And while it's about the journey, right, and the skills that young people are learning along the way, not always what that final PowerPoint or community service or whatever that final project looks like. It's really about the journey and making sure that we're documenting that journey along the way. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So at the center, there's some elements that PBL are really we really want to make sure are anchored by learning goals and industry context, right? So we have some project themes and learning goals that are connected to career pathways, right? So Dennis, can you remind me how many project themes are there now? 8?
Ones that we've created? Yeah, we've created 8 separate project themes.
Yeah. And those are some that are highlighted on the website, on the PBL website, and we can share that link with you as well because the website is live at this moment. Just know that we are still in the process of making some updates from last summer to this summer. So some of the stuff might say 2022, but for the most part of it, a lot of that stuff is still very relevant. We want to make sure that there's key knowledge and understanding, right? So that there's content knowledge is developed and applied to achieve project goals. right? This really goes back to this notion of research, and making sure that young people along the way are not only thinking about the things that they're researching, but also the other skills that we've talked about, right? Those key to being successful, right? Those very critical work readiness skills, right? So while people are doing project-based learning, there's this level of communication, there's team building, there's resource cultivation, there's all sorts of things that we'll talk about in a little bit about those skills. We really want to make sure that we're being intentional about how we're developing people through this notion of project-based learning. So we showed you earlier the positive youth development framework that DYCD has put together. This is their youth leadership framework. And a big part of what we spent the morning part talking about was this notion of creating this right environment and conditions for leadership development, right? So we're really talking about this and really thinking about project-based learning. We're really talking about youth voice and choice, right? And that ability, like Dennis talked about, to participate at a bunch of different levels, and being clear that leadership is a progression, and that all young people aren't going to come into our programs ready to be leaders, and that we have to make sure that we create that environment in order for young people to be willing to thrive in those spaces. So that also requires a level of both physical and psychological safety, making sure we're doing those community building, through creating those community norms, making sure that we understand that even though this is very much youth-led, that throughout this process, there's also a very strong youth-adult partnership, right? Where in the beginning, a large part of how project-based learning will be driven by probably the facilitators, but as things progress and move forward, things become more and more youth-led, but being very clear that that youth-adult partnership always remains. And then we're also thinking about that ability to carry out positive and purposeful interactions with young people, right? So that we're not just having those engagements during the first week, that we're thinking about how these things show up throughout the course of the PBL experience. And last but not least, like reframing conflict, right? Like Dennis said, we need to be able to establish how we're going to manage conflict, not only when we're in person, but also when we're on Zoom, right? And what does that look like? How does managing conflict look like when we're in these boxes on Zoom? Right. So as we're thinking about creating those environments, we've got to think about the things we have to intentionally bake into our plans that we make sure that we're developing in our young people. Because like Dennis said, these are the skills we want young people to develop so they not only get that job, but they keep that job, right? So when people talk about things that they want their young people to walk away with, they say self-awareness, right? They say things like persistence and confidence and active listening, right? And especially when we're talking about things like project-based learning, we're talking about that ability to persuade, that having a shared purpose, being able to convene and delegate and organize other people, right? So those are some of the very key skills that are highlighted here in this youth leadership framework that are really essential to the project-based learning process, right? So one of the things that we're very clear on is if you want to see these things happening for your young people in your program, they actually have to do things in order to develop those skills. And that's when we talk about learning while doing, right? So there's a notion of there being some level of role modeling on the facilitator's part, right? There's that ability for them to actually participate and do things in the process. And last but not least, when we start thinking about what the last final product is going to be, how are we really engaging either the school and the community around what this real pertinent issue is that they're trying to raise through their project-based learning project. And last but not least, making sure that they're having that ability to reflect on what's happening and how they're growing as not only as individuals, but also as a group over the course of the summer, right? So that reflection should be continuous and ongoing, that there should be this notion that we're reflecting on the actions that have happened, right? We're directly connecting to what we did to what we learned from what happened. Because a lot of times what'll end up happening is young people just walk away with whether they had a good time or a bad time, right? And then we have to make sure that we're challenging them and challenging our young people. Because like I said, project-based learning can't be something that is simply Googled. We have to really challenge them to come up with something so that we can deepen that learning and engage them in critical thinking. Dennis, did you want to say something?
Yeah. and just so we're all on the same page, right? Because this is where sometimes people get confused, like, oh, youth voice and choice, right? Oh, the plan has to, like, young people have to decide. Yes, young people have to decide, but you should know in advance that there are skills and abilities and attitudes toward work that you want to teach and or support young people in using along the way. And you know that in advance. So as you are thinking about PBL, and now we're saying, this is what we want young people to be able to do, I now have to begin to plan for that. So in week one, if I want my young people to work together, then in week one, I know that I have to create this space create this environment for a young person to do something. And I know that my young people may not know how to do that. So I'm going to have to teach them that. So that's where both foundationally, the PYD framework and foundationally, the youth leadership frameworks tell us these are the things that we are doing that allow young people to do the things that we want them to do throughout the course of their time with us together. Does that make sense? And again, connecting the dot to the growth mindset, where young people are experiencing things and they're growing through them. But we have to intentionally structure our program in design to make sure that that happens. So when you look at specifically the types of things that young people can accomplish from an attitude and or skill, these core areas are fundamental, again, in project-based learning. We want to make sure that our young people from the very beginning are developing opportunities to become motivated, can develop a sense of self-awareness and persistence. The things that we need to do to strengthen those muscles that are associated with these skills and abilities, or these attitudes and abilities, are what's at the core of the plan. Researching and all of those other things that we saw in the video are mechanisms, right? But we've got to develop a clear project that allows them to be able to collaborate. And what do we mean by collaborate? By being able to have a shared purpose. What do we mean by collaborating? By being able to convene, bring other people together, by being able to work together to delegate some things, organize some other things, so that individuals can begin to develop the work readiness skill that is associated with collaboration. The PBL projects are group projects. We can't say that enough. It's not for one individual to do anything alone. PBL is designed for them to work with other individuals, and that's the skill. So those things require us to be able to, and for them to be able to communicate, right? Sometimes something may need to happen, and they may need to be able to inspire another young person to do something. That may have to be modeled by us. So there's where the facilitator and the program have the opportunity to model the skill and then create the space for the young person to be able to do that. All while exploring, again, jobs, careers that are associated with things that they care about. So that's how they work together. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions about that? All right. So as we keep moving through the process, for us, it's super important that we think about where are we connecting to specific things that need to happen. One, we're going to need to be able to focus on those leadership skills, focus on the communication, focus on collaboration, but bring that together with another critical skill, and that is called reflection on action. It's a skill. Reflection in and of itself is a skill. We need it. We can't say that enough. Reflection is a skill. It's based on an ability and a knowledge base. In order to make reflection happen, we want to make sure that our young people are doing things and then continuously building in opportunities for young people to reflect on that. Reflection has to be continuous. It needs to be connected. We should be challenging our young people when they research something to continue to explore it. Again, there's fundamentally how we connect the dot between there's no wrong answer and young people being able to learn how to use research to find solutions to things that may or may not match up. A lot of times when the reason why the answer could seem as wrong is because context always matters, right? So something that may work in one space may not work in another because of the context associated with that action. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about how are the things that we're doing appropriate, not right, meaningful, not right, as a part of the experience, so that ultimately young people get to learn how to make new plans. We want them to do something, reflect on it, and do something else. That's engagement. So now when we think about project-based learning and we think about what young people are doing and the separation and the connection between a job and a career, a young person begins to see that this is a job. And we talked about this morning about being able to define the difference in between a job and a career. And everybody kind of raised their hand that we know the difference in between a job and a career. But want to be really, I'm gonna give us a bit of a definition for ourselves to think about this, right? Jobs are more about instances. They're tasks that we do in a moment. The career is more about how do we take for an individual when they're thinking about it, how do they take all of the things that they've done, how do they match that up with all of the things that they may want to do, and then begin to look at what are the relevant experiences that they need to have to let them flourish in that space in an ongoing way, right? So I might have the job of being a facilitator, but I may not move into a career that has me facilitating different content, doing different things over the course of my time, so that now this job that I do that's talking to people turns into a career that is all about supporting, capacity building, doing the work that I'm doing today. Does that make sense? So we're thinking about explaining to young people so they can reflect on things, the skills that they acquire, how they think about it in that way. Project-based learning is designed to help them unpack that. Any questions about that before we move forward? Okay, so we're talking about our plans and we're talking about the work that we're doing. We know that we're giving young people opportunities to be able to do that by doing 7 clear things. So we talked about the Buck Institute and we talked about being able to think about what our project design elements are. There are 7 of them. And the 7 of them, what make up the entire PBL process. We're going to start by identifying a challenging problem or question. And just so we're all on the same page, who's identifying the challenge or the challenging problem or question? Need to hear a voice, or you drop it in the chat. Who's identifying a challenging problem or question in a PBL at every site this summer? Whose role is that?
You said to identify a challenging problem or question. That would be our role, I would think.
Nope.
No.
The chat says the students.
Yes, it's and Rachel, just so like sometimes that's where it goes wrong. We can identify the theme. We have the ability of thinking of the theme. The young person has to connect the dot from the theme to a challenging problem or question for them that is connected to that theme. So if we identify a theme of homelessness or any other theme, or food deserts or any other thing, it now becomes the job of the young person to figure out what is the challenging problem or question for them associated with that theme. That's what leads them to the second part, sustained inquiry. It is through this process that you get to authenticity. If we come up with the theme and we come up with the problem, it may not be authentically connected to the young person's life. And a lot of times, remember we talked about engagement, this is why the young person don't care. You care about that. The young person doesn't care. It's not an authentic question of theirs, which turns into this notion of student voice and choice. Young people deciding, telling us, and then as a group, right? And then there's a mechanism, the skill about how do they choose what the challenging problem or question is that they are going to research. Again, here's where it's working together. The skill of reflection based on activity leads us to an ongoing process of critique and revision. Young people throughout the summer should constantly be critiquing, not criticizing, critiquing, another skill, critiquing their work, critiquing the process, and then making a revision so that if something needs to change, which should be, could be either based on reflection of what they've been doing, or could be, we thought one thing, we've gotten some information because remember, we've been doing inquiry the entire time. Now something else has changed. So they can get to the public product as the final part of the process. Theo?
And, one of the things that we've definitely seen happen over the course of the summer is just like what Dennis said, the group will be moving in a direction and something will happen through their research and they might change their whole project or their whole challenge in week 4. And you're going to be like, no, it's too late. But be clear, that's okay, right? It is okay for them to change and or decide they're going to do 2 projects, right? Let them make that decision, right? What might happen is they might not finish both of them, but I guarantee you one thing, they'll be more engaged if the 2 get to participate in the creation of those 2 separate projects, as opposed to you forcing those that didn't want to continue to do that project to continue to do that project over the remainder of those last couple of weeks. Does that make sense? Because it becomes then more part of the process. And you can say, hey, listen, guys, you made the choice during week 4 when we talked about time, we talked about all these other parameters as to whether or not you want to switch or not. You made the decision. You can continue. The beautiful part about project-based learning is that the hope is that it spurs some level in that young person to continue to remain engaged in that topic, whether it's through their own research and just staying connected with it, or whether it's through further career exploration.
And see, now that's how we get to career. Does that make sense? So what we want to do is keep them thinking about it. You're literally talking about this bridge program, which is getting you to, like, for those of them that are 15 that are going to work next year at 16, may be the beginning of a job. So now when they're 16 and they go and choose a work site, they could choose a work site that may be connected to something that they've explored. Does that make sense? This notion of how we are taking 14 and 15-year-old participation and bridging it to what's going to happen next. That's the way this is designed. So when we think about moving forward about these 7 design elements, and I know there's a lot going on right now. I know that a lot of people are doing a lot of different things right now. But if you can, pause for a minute, look up at your screen. This is the secret sauce. Pause for a minute. You're about to get the whole thing laid out for you. Turn around and look at the screen. These are the design elements. Your PBL has to be authentically designed, derived from your young people. It connects to something that is real to them. That real world context is what makes the young person really connect to what's going on. It's how you get to voice and choice. If you decide for them, then it's easier for them to walk away. What we're talking about is a problem or a challenge that is meaningful. Again, it has to be meaningful to the young person. So sometimes we have really important topics, themes that mean something to us. Unfortunately, they don't mean anything to the young person. So we've got to be able to help them in an age-appropriate way, be able to identify the challenge. That's where working with them comes in. Inquiry has to be sustained and rigorous. You really want them to think. You really want them to explore over the course of the summer and then find different resources and different ways of being able to apply what they've learned. That's what PBL is. So again, sometimes our summers go left because we leave out an element. Do not be afraid, as Theo said, to critique and review all the way through. It could come that in week 4, the young people decide, yeah, we weren't really paying attention to you in week 2 when you made that decision. Now in week 4, the truth shows up. Don't be afraid to let them make changes. Remember, the whole idea is they're improving their process, not yours. It's their process. It's not about you in PBL, the topic. Right? You got the theme, but what they really care about is them. The public product is a way for you to be able to display, give young people an opportunity to explain what they've been doing. They could talk to people as a part of the process. It does not have to be a big to-do, but the young person has to figure that out. Now, it doesn't mean that you're sitting on the sideline doing nothing. The biggest thing that the worker has to be able to do, and the most important part for the program to structure, is reflection. In structure, how are young people and the facilitators going to reflect on what they've been doing from week to week so they can measure the effectiveness of the research, of the inquiry? If they've been doing stuff and it's not working, you had this great plan about how they were going to do research, but you look up, the internet and your site has been shoddy the entire time, but you planned on doing a lot of exploration in that way. You thought you were going to do a bunch of trips. No one ever goes. They have to be able to reflect on the process so that they can talk about the obstacles and create a way of overcoming them. These 7 things are what build your program. It's how it's functioning. If you skip a step, you're going to get to the other step and you're going to realize like, oh, this is what's wrong. When we ask the question about the who decides the problem or the question, trust me, you need a mechanism for those groups of 15 to 20 young people to decide. You have to teach them that. It is easier for you to do it yourself. Sure is, right up until they don't want to do it. And then it's not so easy anymore. So if you take the time to teach them how to do things, then you could work together. Does that make sense? So when we talk about project-based learning at its core, 101, this is what we're talking about. Now, I want to talk about some expectations. As you are planning the most important thing for you to remember is that you're always thinking about every day, all day, what are young people doing and what is the facilitator doing? At no point should anybody be doing nothing all the time. If you expect a young person to be doing something, then you should know that there's something that connects or corresponds to what the facilitator is doing, and vice versa. All day, it has to be planned. That's that intentionality thing. So when we think about the work that we're doing, we give you another tool, another strategy, and we call that big A and little a. Little a are all of the action steps, all of the things that need to happen within an activity to make it work. So when you think about this Zoom, in order to make this Zoom training work, let's say this Zoom is the big A activity, right? Because when we think about work that we're doing in our programs, maybe using Zoom is the way we're going to do it. What are some things that you think have to happen in order to make that work? Theo, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask a quick question even before. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's go that way. Yeah. I didn't know where you were going with that question, but yes. What's the first thing that needs to happen in order to make that work? What's the first thing that needs to happen in order for this Zoom thing to work?
You mean as far as a whole?
Yep.
So I think the community guidelines, right? The community norms.
Hold on, Rachel. Even before we get to the community norms, what's the first?
Introducing yourself and checking in. I would say, right, checking in.
Even before that, Sharita, you got something for me?
Now I was on the same little path, getting them the Zoom link. So
there we go. There we go. That is it. That is literally it. Zoom, number one is making sure they have a Zoom link, right? What is the mechanism for making sure they have that Zoom link? That is exactly what it is, right? Because without that Zoom link, there's no welcome, there's no introductions, there's no checking in. None of that happens, right? So, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're right.
No, and I was going to say, so when we think about the first activity that takes place in our program, once it's up and run, once we get the Zoom links out, or we're in person, what's the first activity that happens in everybody's program? Even with Zoom, what's the first activity?
Try to do introductions and orientation.
Okay, but even before introductions and orientations, what's the first? Even before that, what has to happen?
Everybody got to show up.
Arrival. Right? Arrival is literally the first activity that happens in everybody's program. The way young people are treated, even adults, the way you're treated during arrival to a space affects how you engage with that program, right? So when we talk about when young people, we always hear, I always hear all the time, oh, I want young people to be excited when they get to my program. Okay, well, what are you doing to make them excited to come to your program? Just because they have a Zoom link or an address to your building doesn't make them excited to walk into your space. So what about your program? What about your space? What about your Zoom is exciting when they log on, right? When you think about this space, when you logged onto this space, what's one thing that was happening?
Music was playing.
What happened? I didn't hear you. Tyler.
Music was playing.
Music was playing, right? What else was happening? There was another key piece that was happening as people were arriving. Sharita.
Dennis was talking and telling them what their space was.
Exactly. There was music playing, and then there was a person speaking to them and talking to them and keeping them engaged and saying, hey, how you doing? So Hannick's in the house, so-and-so's in the house, really bringing a certain level of energy. Now, Imagine when you go into spaces, there's no music playing. The facilitators have their cameras off. And then all of a sudden it gets to be 10 o'clock. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, everybody, we're going to get started. Right? That's not into, that takes away from more than likely what you want to actually see happening for your young people as they're logging on and or arriving to your program. So when we think about arrival / logging on, we think about that as the big A, and then we've got to think about those small action steps that actually make arrival happen the way we want to make arrival happen. That's the intentionality behind planning. We want young people to feel like they belong. We've got to do things during arrival to make young people feel like they belong. Whether that's playing music that's relevant to them, or maybe one of them is the DJ. Right? So those are the types of things we're talking about, right? And then you think about transitions, and what do transitions in your programs look like? Does that make sense to folks when we talk about big A, little a? The real intentionality behind like really drilling down. And it, like Dennis said, it's just one of those tools that we try to give folks, because for us, this is all about planning, right? And then taking the knowledge around project-based learning that we're giving you today and those other key fundamentals around positive youth development, and how are you developing a plan so that you see those outcomes. You can look at your plan and say, okay, this is what I did intentionally to make this outcome happen for my young people. And then when you debrief with them and they reflect, I see you, Dennis, when you debrief with them and they reflect and they say, oh, well, that didn't happen for me, you can now go back and look at that piece that you did intentionally in order to make that happen and figure out how you have to shift and change what you did in order to next time, hopefully have that outcome happen for your young people. Dennis.
Here's something to think about. So can we do the same thing in person that we do in Zoom? So in Zoom, were you gonna say something, Melissa?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say kind of like it's not person to person, like physical, interaction, but you can still do things that are similar to mimic like the environment. So for example, like it doesn't hurt to remember someone's name. It makes them feel like you're connected with them. Or I don't know. That's the first one that came to my head.
I love it, but here's what's real. The reason why we know everybody's name here in this space, what makes it easier for me to remember 70 different names? Am I really remembering them? Or because this is Zoom, everybody's name right here. It's easier for me to know everybody's name.
Yes. Yeah. Now I was going to say, or one of the things that we do is when we're working with groups over a period of time, when we do orientations, if I know somebody pronounces their name differently than how it's spelled, I'll put something on the attendance sheet so that if Dennis sees their name on Zoom, he knows how to pronounce it, right? So those are one of the things, like one of the small other tweaks that you can also make. Like if you know that's the way somebody's name is, or maybe Todd Rick just prefers to be called Todd, right? I would just put next to Todd Rick, Todd, so that Dennis knows, boom. And then, he'd be like, oh, wow, everybody seems to know me already. That's crazy. How did everybody know that I want to be called Todd and not Todd Rick? Not that that's what was the deal, but I'm just saying, for an example, that's what we would do, right? That's the difference between like really being intentional on Zoom around people's names. And or if somebody doesn't like to go by their government, giving them that opportunity to change their name on Zoom, obviously, as long as it's appropriate, right? And we talk about things like that when it comes to being work ready, right? Like Chill Baby is cool if that's your block and your friends, but at work, I ain't calling you Chill Baby. That ain't gonna be your nickname at work, okay? That's not what you can put up here, okay? You got to figure out some other way around your government to figure out how you're gonna work in this space, okay? Yes.
And we also want to remind ourselves, right? Like I know when I did SYEP, arrival was like everybody go in the auditorium or everybody go in the cafeteria. That's where they went. 70 people on this Zoom is one thing about how things work. Remember we talked earlier about space, appropriateness, physical and psychological safety. What happens when the norms that are established for coming on this Zoom, and then we go in person and the 60 people that have been convening that I've been talking to all show up and they're in the cafeteria? It's easier for me because I have greater control. If somebody start talking as the facilitator on Zoom, what do? I just press the mute button and then there you go. But when 60 of them are in the cafeteria, what's the structure? What are the little A things that need to occur then? One of the things that we found in our research is that Zoom allowed us to be able to see more young people. It allowed 2 people to be able to manage larger groups. Sometimes the person has the ability to manage the big A activity online. That same person, they go in person, it's a whole nother ball game. We need more people. So when we think about little A structures, right? The same way we talked about creating the Zoom and disseminating the Zoom and now becomes creating the sign-in sheet and making sure everybody signs in and making sure that everybody understands how to function in our space. All those things become little A action steps that we've got to think about in advance so that when our young people get there, we're ready to go. So it's not enough to just think about the big things that are going to happen. PBL is about exploration. And because young people are going to be doing a lot of different things, we need to be intentional and prepared for them to do all of those things. So the way that we like to talk about that is through these 4 specific things that we call the 4 C's. We need to be able to give our program and our activities something that we call characteristics. Characteristics are simply like, what does this look like? So if I'm going to bring my 60 young people into the cafeteria, what does that look like? Into the auditorium, what does that look like? Onto Zoom, what does that look like? And in order to make that happen, I got to have the parts and structures. And those parts and structures are simply called components. Inside of everything that I want to see, there has to be something that happens to make it happen. So when Theo talked about arrival and the fact that if I want my young people to get there and feel welcomed and to feel like this is a place for them, I have to have a component of my program that's going to make that happen inside of arrival. 99% of the time, that has to be directly connected to an individual or group of individuals. We call those people characters, right? Making sure that the right person is doing the right thing. And a lot of times in the summer, it's the morning and young people be coming in and I'm not a morning person. So if I'm not a morning person and I'm the greeter, what kind of greeting you think they're going to get? Versus I am a morning person and I'm up and I'm like, yeah, let's right now that still could drive some young people nuts, but at the same time, it's what I wanted to see and I put a person. And it's not enough to have only that person know that that's their role. This is where characters are important. Everybody has to know that that's their role, not just because when they're there, because when they're not there, somebody else needs to do that. So characters have to not just be one deep if we expect something to happen. The biggest challenge that we see in programming is translation. A lot of times we'll have young people, we'll have families who are coming into our programs. We know good and well that they speak multiple languages. But because, this entire time, well, I know that I'll just pick a name. I see the last name Vargas. I'll just make an assumption that Tatiana may speak Spanish. So I'm going to go ahead on and say that this is the person that's going to translate. Tatiana come and go like, I don't speak no Spanish. I don't even know what they were talking to me for. I don't speak Spanish. We made an assumption. We put somebody in place and they don't speak Spanish at all, or their ability to communicate with individuals fluently doesn't work. So now, again, we create a challenge. Those challenges always are readily identifiable because of the way they look. They're generally connected to a component or a structure that doesn't exist, or a person that either doesn't fit or doesn't exist. So that's how our 4 C's allow us to be able to think about programming in a clear way. 2 of the most important things that work together, I know Theo, and then we'll go. 2, can you switch to the next one? 2 things that work.
I was just gonna say, another flaw with the character is oftentimes you designate yourself as the character all the time. You become the greeter, you become all those other things. And the problem is you're not always available to do those things. And that's why Dennis was saying that characters have to be deep, right? And other folks need to know that if Ms. Thomas isn't there, that I need to step up and say the expectation and what we understand to be a part of this program is that when young people come into this space, they're greeted, preferably by name, right? And that's an expectation that everybody knows in the program. So that it's like, oh, Ms. Thomas isn't here, that doesn't happen, right? Because young people pick up and feed on that and they go, oh, well, maybe I'm not welcome here when Ms. Thomas isn't here. So when they come and they see Ms. Thomas isn't there, they're like, you know what? I'm not coming to program today.
So really quick before we move in the last 2 minutes, characteristics. Do most of your programs expect young people to have cameras on in virtual spaces?
We requested it last year, but it was hit or miss. I got a lot of, well, my camera's broke.
So I'm just gonna say that we hear that a lot, and then people say that's because it's work, right? And I'm gonna go back to what I was saying this morning. That yep, people encourage it, people require it, and the very same programs that have people say we encourage it and we require it, people don't have their cameras on right now.
So I just like to share that if a participant says they don't have a working camera, we give them 1 pass, but then they have to come to the center and pick up a device that has a working camera. So we give them 1 pass.
I deeply respect that. I'm just saying that our programs often, we don't mirror the things that we require of our participants in our own practice. I'm not saying that cameras have to be on. I'm saying that we've got to be able to figure out, exactly as Dr. Castillo just said, what are we going to do? Are we going to require people to do things? And how willing are we to require those same things of ourselves as a characteristic? Because sometimes the largest challenge is, and this is again, we in work environments requiring things of young people, and young people see it. And then we try to talk to them about it, and it's a struggle. So I just want you to think about that. Think about our own practices of our organizations as we think about what we require of young people. Okay, Melissa, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I think that was a good point. I think last year you guys brought up that point about the cameras, and I tried it out because for us we kind of did require them to have it on, but it was really helpful because a lot of them, like you guys mentioned last year, they might be living in a tight space and things like that, things that we don't know or that they might not want to disclose in front of everyone. And it was really helpful. Like, we didn't encourage them to forcefully turn on the camera, but we told them just make sure you're being active on the chat so that we know you're there. And they grew their confidence, and without us telling them, in the end, like, they started slowly turning on their cameras when they felt more comfortable.
Excellent.
Exactly. You know, like I say to people all the time, you don't just let anybody in your house. You only let people in your house that you kind of know, right? Like, so when you're telling a young person who, like James just said, or K James just said, you know, there's that situation where a young person might be in a living circumstance, it's very difficult, right? And they don't necessarily want to show you that. That requires a whole development of relationship building with that young person, right? Because otherwise, I don't know what we're going to call that, but at some point, somebody's going to come up with the word for that. You know how we have ableism and ageism. That's going to become an ism at some point. Cameraism. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something. But we don't want to practice that in this space.
Right.
We want to make sure that, because even and one of the things that I'll say is, there's a reason why some of y'all don't have your cameras on, because some of you might have devices that don't have cameras. Some of you might be on your cell phones, and that's your only device right now, even for y'all, right? So we have to be very clear that young people and staff still have the same technology struggles and issues, period, right? So we have to be aware of that and not bring that our desire to see their faces trump their experience in our program.
And we just can't stress that enough, because we just routinely hear about people requiring cameras, or yeah, it's optional. And then because of a site visit, not necessarily by DYCD, but because somebody else comes on and says, oh, well, where were your participants? Nobody was doing anything. Like, just being really clear that there are a lot of reasons, both that are valid. So a characteristic of our program that talks about cameras is super important for us in this space to be clear about that as a rule or a norm that is extremely tough, right? And as Monique says, like, yeah, we have to create space as facilitators that really do kind of bring everything, but we've got to create characteristics of our programs, more importantly, that really do allow young people to participate. That's what we're talking about. So knowing what our program, knowing what the components of our program, right? Like when Melissa said, like, oh, their participation, they're doing things in the chat. They're doing all of these other things that allow us to say that they are present. Those are characteristics of your program. So that when the pressure comes and somebody is like jumps onto your Zoom, and yes, there are 60 some odd young people registered and there are 10 cameras on, they're not saying to you in that moment, oh, nobody's doing anything, what are you doing? And then the pressure becomes on you to start talking about turn your cameras on, turn your cameras on, turn your cameras on. And that's why when we talk about this next thing, being really clear about the characteristics and components of your program, knowing what does your program look like, even in person, what does it look like? What does it look like when your participants are actively engaged? What does it look like? What are young people doing? What is the staff member doing? Both hybrid, both virtual, when they're transitioning. What does that look like, so that you make sure you've got clear components that are designed to make that happen? If you think about when you came on in the first half, Theo is reading things that are in the chat. I'm typing messages in the chat. Elisha, who's with us, who's our coordinator, when neither one of us catch something in the chat, it's a third person that maybe no one has spoken to, but he's here to make sure that we can capture everything. You have to be intentional about how you staff, especially when you have large programs, large convenings. You're bringing a lot of young people in. Those, next slide, characters. It has to be a person. It cannot be, oh, well, I thought this person was going to do it. I thought it was this supervisor. No, it's this person. This is their role. And the temperament of that individual is super important, because your young people are coming to you from all different spaces doing all different things. So if you don't identify people to do things, both in person and online, you will not see what you want to see. So making sure that there's a component and a character are critical. But when you see something and it's not working, you got to know that that's a challenge. And then you have to work backwards to make sure that both the part and the person exists. When things aren't happening with your young people, start there. What is the part and who is the person? What is the part and who is the person? Don't jump to the fact that it's a young person not doing something, especially in these spaces. Do we have a component, and is there a person assigned, and is that the right person? Because you know, unfortunately, this isn't to be too disparaging on this group of people. Like, our young people go to school, and most of them, who's the first person they interact with when they walk into a school building? Anybody? Who's the first person they interact with? School, yep, correct, Monique. School safety. And what are they asking them to do in most of our buildings? What are they asking them to do?
Take off their belts and go through scanning.
Go through scanning. Take off your belt, go through scanning. Do they want them to talk? Nope. So understand what's happening. And again, that's role. That's role. So coming out of that, if you want to see something, you got to do something, recognizing that somebody else, I'm going to say, had a job. So now you have to create a component and identify a character to re-welcome your young person into your space. You have to do that so that PBL could take place. Because if all you do is send them into the cafeteria or send them into the auditorium and you haven't done something, then that environment continues. Sure, Dr. Castillo.
So to go with the challenges, what we do at our center is we look at every application. We see, because we have learned from, our 5 years of experience, that a lot of times they don't identify themselves with students with disabilities. However, if we look at the schools they're going to, we can tell if they're in an alternative school. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm in the office. So we categorize the students. We know if they live in a homeless shelter. We know if they're on food stamps, because then we do like a food pantry. So we categorize them in every single area just so that they know they're supported, and we adapt the programs for the special, students with disabilities. So if they can't do the work in the allotted time, we amend the work to them. And I personally do that with them because I want to make sure that they all feel that sense of belonging, and that, sense that they have one person that they can always count on. So I think it's great. And we actually already started. We already know we have about 14 kids that live in housing projects. We have about 18 kids that go to alternative schools. So just getting all that data, it just really builds for success.
Excellent. And here's one thing I'll say: for every young person that you know what's going on, there's probably 2 or 3 more that you don't. So the reality is, what we want to do is create our programs to be inclusive of all young people. And we want to make sure that we are creating structures that really allow young people to overcome obstacles. And one of the greatest ways to do that in our programming by design is to make sure that we're thinking about meaningful roles for those young people. There are so many things that every young person can do inside of program when we think about it in this structured way. So it's not just about what do we as adults need to do, but how do we evolve? How do we develop? How do we strengthen our young people so that they are able to take on meaningful things within the program? Meaningful roles will scaffold. Meaningful roles will allow young people to move to a space where they can become more involved in the core things that are happening at your site. Remember, PBL is about a group of young people being engaged. And as we talked about from the very beginning, how we set that structure, how we create that environment that is going to have young people primarily doing projects and tasks, just as a part of the PBL structure. So the more young people that are doing projects and tasks that are meaningful over time, the greater the opportunity for them to partner with you as they move forward. Again, we need to have clear components that allow young people to move from just doing projects and tasks to actually being able to give input into the types of things that are happening within program. That's why we talk about, as a big part of this process, really being clear about how do we give young people voice and choice? How do we move them forward using reflection with staff and critique and revisionment? Critique and revisionment is a clear way for young people to have input and provide consultation around the types of things that are happening in program. So we have to be able to build in, remember we talked about at the beginning, making sure that young people are developing skills so that orientation processes and engagement processes that may have in the beginning be held by a staff member. The more you're preparing your young people, you can give them opportunities to do things like that as well. And you learn about those things in collaboration. Did I do something? I just saw like people just start laughing. I was like feeling away.
No, you're good. You're good.
All right. So as we, excuse me. So as we move through this process, we want to continue to actually what your PBL projects are actually looking to do. Go back to that other one. Is shared leadership. Ultimately, your young people need to be able to make some decisions with you. Coming out of that critique and revisionment and moving into the next space is young people being able to decide inside of this program with you what they're gonna do. Does that make sense? In the end, the young person needs to be able to decide with you what they're gonna do. Not the young person deciding on their own, not you deciding on your own, but together. This is a program. So that final part that moves them from just doing research, that moves them to just kind of working with you and giving you some thoughts about what might happen, transitions in its final phase to you guys really working together on that final product, making decisions together on what's gonna happen as a wrap up of your time together. So that's why when we talk about our project-based learning, we like you to think about it in 3 phases. And those 3 phases simply are, in the beginning, how are we going to engage? What does engagement look like? Now, when I say in the beginning, I mean like in the beginning of every day for the entire summer. What does your engagement of your participants look like? How are you bringing them together? How are you making sure every day, all summer, there's some element that is connected to team building? There's some element that is connected to leadership. There's some element that's connected to orientating them about what this group is. So that deal.
No, I was going to just say something, it could be, and when we say activity, right? Activity can be taken as a word that's much bigger than it actually is, right? So even something as simple as listening to a song, having a chant, having a motto, something like that they do every day literally could be that activity. It doesn't have to be something, then you think about it as it being like 15, 20 minutes. It can be something that's really quick, but that definitely triggers engagement. I'm here and I'm a part of this today, right? Maybe the young people create a pledge or something along those lines, but that becomes the activity. I just want to be clear. Activity is not super big. Sometimes it's just very small.
Does that make sense? Right? And that engagement really propels them into investigation, right? constant exploration. Every day they should be exploring something. Every day they should be trying to figure out something new. The thing that they're trying to figure out new should be connected, and connecting the dots to those things that they care about and the jobs and ultimately the careers that live within. Again, this is a workforce program. So we're thinking about what are the jobs and careers that young people can begin to learn about so that they can ultimately maybe give themselves some career goals, give them some things that are aspirational as they begin to think about their future. Going back to this morning, right? Recognizing that, like, yeah, in some spaces, the types of things that people are doing that will afford them a livable wage, that will give them benefits, is changing. So if we don't help young people begin to prepare for those careers in the future, then they may not know where they should go, what they should do that would allow them to be able to have that career in the future. And then finally, because we want to make sure that they know that there is value just in using their voice, practicing using their voice, this notion of taking action, this notion of doing something with what they've learned, sharing that and getting feedback from others is the final part of this 3-stage plan. So we want to make sure that from the very beginning, you're working with them. Who's going to hear what they've done all summer? They may not have completed it, but they've done something all summer. So we want to be planning that from the very beginning, talking to them about that from the very beginning. So at the end of the summer, they've done something and others are going to learn about that. So YDI created a digital curriculum, as we said, and that digital curriculum really does blend some self-guided activities that are facilitated by a leader's guide that gives them a workbook. It really does support self-exploration. It builds on many of the things that they would have done in the exploration with Hats and Ladders, where they really began to talk about the things that they care about. They talked about some of the things that they may kind of have as a part of their own journey. But again, the big thing is that it's about providing a process by which they can identify and address issues and challenges in their community, but also all the time working on their work readiness skills. That's the purpose. Understand, we were preparing them for the world of work. And a big part of that is also trying to figure out what are careers, right? Like, how do I not just think about a job? Because a lot of times a young person will just take the first job that comes to them and do that every summer. And then they go off to wherever, like graduate high school or they do whatever. They have no idea about what are the careers that are around them that really could allow them to have a livable wage, that really could allow them to have benefits and all those things that we're talking about. It starts now. So we've created this 3-stage process within the platform. So if you go online and you look at the workbook and you look at all of the learning modules that are there for you, it's gonna walk you through in all 6 weeks of program. It'll give you a really good process by which you can begin to either utilize it or you can pull it apart and connect it to something that you've already decided to do. But the biggest thing is for you to be able to be really clear about what PBL is and its elements. From the very beginning, it's important that you are thinking about authenticity of the question. It's not your question, it's your theme. Next slide, Theo. That authenticity of the question is what really makes this real. The young person has to be able to get context and then learn through tasks and the use of tools, like how do I really think about things that impact me? So that ultimately they learn how to talk about the things that impact them through the use of their own voices, and then begin to make decisions, make choices about what they're going to do with the things that they are doing. What they're going to do with the things that they are doing. That's what their voice and choice is about. because ultimately there is going to be a final product. Every week, all along, they're going to be thinking about, what am I gonna do? What decisions can I make about what I've done? So when they move into that investigation process and they really start to figure out this question, how are they gonna research it? How are they gonna continue to engage in rigorous inquiry that really takes this process and gives them the tools to figure out, what are the questions that I have? What are the resources that could allow me to continue to dig? What are the things that I can do every week that allow me to apply what I've learned, so that ultimately I'm able to be reflective, right? Like, how do I critique what I've done with my facilitator? So again, how do I look at what I've done and then make a new plan with my facilitator? And making a new plan with the facilitator, beginning to learn how to share power, is again all about that youth voice and choice. How can we structure young people who have acquired skills, who know things, to be able to make decisions? That's what PBL in this SYEP Summer Bridge is all about. Finally, at the end, there has to be some type of public product. Use the word has to be, term has to be some type of public product that the young people can share with others. Doesn't have to be a finished work like we've been studying this and this is what we found out. No, it may just be, we've been studying this all summer. This is what we've done all summer, but they got to be able to share that with other people in a meaningful way. Theo?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is what we've done this summer, and these are some of the questions we still have remaining, right? Those, we definitely came across a lot of that, especially when groups decide in the middle that they want to change their project, and they don't get to the end. It's really all about making sure, like Dennis said, that the final product is a presentation of the process, right? Which could be the ups and the downs, right? I actually got a real opportunity to sit in with a group last year that experienced some some inner group turmoil, right? The teens might have amongst relationships that caused the group to divide halfway through the summer. But that they were able to talk about that process, why they did it, and how they came to the conclusions that they came to.
And that's all associated with reflection, right? Like young people have got to learn how to reflect on things that happen, but facilitators have to do that with them. Because a lot of times we leave our young people holding the bag for the things that have happened, and the facilitator just kind of like is able to take a step back, but they're reflecting not only on what has happened, but that entire journey. They're reflecting on what did they learn. They're reflecting on how did they begin to figure things out? What were the obstacles and challenges that arose for them throughout the course of the summer? All of this is what is happening and goes into that final product, right? Like where they're really able to talk about their journey and again, use their voice. If you notice, the one thing that kept happening across the entire summer, week after week, has been young people making decisions about their project. Young people being able to think about, talk about the work consistently. Now, as you do this, young people are going to work in two ways, right? All summer long. They're going to do some things synchronously, right? With their group, right? Stuck on repeat. Young people are doing things with their group as a part of this. That is synchronous work that is facilitated by an adult primarily. Sometimes over time, there may be some synchronous work that could be facilitated by a young person if you train them. If you train them, a young person can actually lead some of the facilitated sessions over the course of time. But these things are done inside of the group. That is a big part of this. There is a group expectation. Now, aside from that, just because there's all this opportunity to continue to explore. There's asynchronous work that happens outside of the group that's self-guided. You're trying to also get them to learn how to look for information, how to get them to explore, how to get them to learn about the things that they care about, and then bring that they've learned to the group. So it starts in the group, it leaves the group, it comes back to the group. At no point should anything be happening sort of in its own silo, in its own vacuum. It's all designed to work together. Because remember, you're trying to teach them the skill of being able to work with others, right? So we want to make sure that we're creating this space. Remember, we talked about at no time should anybody be doing nothing. They're doing something alone, and then they're doing something with the facilitator. Now, when we talk about the facilitator and we talk about what this process is like, we want to be really clear that there are some touch points that really are going to have to be taken to make sure that young people are clear about what's expected of them. And you're going to need to talk to them, connect with them in a lot of different ways. So we think about the way that we've kind of worked together, even in this process, right? Like there are a lot of different ways that we get information. There are content-driven touch points that are all about the information. You guys are going to need to send emails. You're probably going to need to develop group chats. You may even need to send text reminders. One of the things that we know that has happened, like there's so many things that are going on, it'd be real easy to forget that there's something that has to happen. So sometimes it may be phone calls. And one of the things that could be the saving grace, if you learn how to use your calendar, like those calendar reminders, that's it, that kind of show up and say, hey, I've got a meeting in 15 minutes. So all of those things can really help young people be able to remember, and even us remember where we're supposed to be, when we're supposed to be there, and what we're supposed to be doing, right? So being able to do those things together become a part of this content connected touch point where every week, and sometimes multiple times a week, there's messaging that's going out to young people to remind them of the things that they're doing, especially when we're working in these in these virtual spaces, right?
And especially when we're in these hybrid spaces. I wish my job would tell me to come in 2 days out of the week. I'm telling you, I'd be there every wrong day. Telling them, "Oop, it ain't my day. My bad." So like Dennis, like I really can't stress the importance of the over communication to your young people in multiple different ways.
Right. So, and then there are some relationship touch points, right? Like one thing we want to be really clear on, these are still young people. And as much as we like to talk about the fact that, oh, well, this is the world, okay, great. They're still young people. And we need to be able to do some individualized communication. And that's why at times there may need to be more than one person. You may have to send them reminders, and that's okay, right? But then there's also opportunities to do other things. One of the things that I know in the beginning, like people talked about games like Kahoots and all these other things that you could do both online and more importantly in person. Like it isn't just about the work, it's also about building community. So much has been lost in socialization over the last few years that building in opportunities for young people to socialize, building in opportunities for young people to kind of come together, just relax in a still a structured environment is super important. I know one thing that has happened is a lot of times like people will say like, oh, we're gonna play a game around a meal. We just encourage you to think about that because there are a lot of circumstances and a lot of situations that go on where a young person may not have food. So if you are going to say like, hey, we're going to do this game, or we're going to meet around lunch, and you're sitting there and you're having your lunch, and there could be a young person that is like, yeah, that's not a good feeling. So we encourage you, right? Like there are sites that have gotten like gift cards, or they're using Uber Eats, or they do all kinds of things to make sure that that young person is actually able to have a meal if we're going to have a virtual meal. If the program is structuring a virtual meal, the program should structure the meal the same. Like does that make sense? Like we have to be, if we're saying we're going to eat together, then we're responsible for making sure that the young person can eat. still a young person. They're still a participant in a program, right? And then the last part about this, and we want to be real clear in this, is this notion of intentional check-ins. And when we talk about check-ins, like we're talking about checking in with young people. We're not talking about asking a young person how they're doing, kind of the way that people used to ask people how they're doing. Hey, how you doing? And then we kind of keep it moving. Or I'm asking you how you're doing because I really want to ask you about some work you didn't do. When we're asking a young person, or we're asking anybody, as a matter of fact, about how they're doing, like it's just that. We set aside intentional time just to check on our participants. And we really are building in mechanisms to help them talk to us about how they're doing as a part of this process, because that's a skill too. Many of us do not know how to talk about how we're doing. We use those 2, 3 things when someone says, how you doing? I'm either happy or I'm mad, or maybe I might be deep enough to say that I'm sad. Like, but
I'm good.
Oh yeah, I'm good.
No.
I'm
It's
just
like
good.
this. It's like this. It's like this. I'm good.
I'm good is like universal for every emotion, right? So a part of our process in developing these touch points that support our young people are really about making sure that we really do have an opportunity to kind of connect with them. These PBL projects are still connected to positive youth development, right? Like, and we talked about what positive youth development was this morning. It's a pro-social approach. So we're talking about engaging young people. We're talking about doing outcomes-based work, but it's about connecting. It's about this notion of connectedness. And some of what we've done is, as I've kind of shared, is created some tools. So some of the tools that live both on our website and even this recording are a bunch of ways for you to be able to use a youth workbook. There are facilitator facing tools that in this static website, you could pull it up, you could see it. It is not broken down. Here's one we have to fix. It's not broken down in between younger youth and older youth. The website is organized around 14 and 15-year-olds. So everything that you see is either for 14-year-olds or for 15-year-olds. But and primarily the difference in the 15-year-olds is that we know that there are some young people who were with you last year that there's an opportunity for you to do some other things with them. So there are additional hours, additional opportunities for them to have asynchronous work that exists within the guide for your 15-year-olds. But the website, as it says, is going to have clear portfolio steps, like how do they document the process, right? Really talking about what comes out of this participant workbook. The participant workbook, in some places, I'll be honest, when people are doing either in-person or hybrid programming, what the program did was they just printed out the entire workbook, put it in a folder, and when a young person comes in, the young person takes out whatever they're working on, and then when they're done, they put it back in their folder. And we talk about that as sort of like these artifacts that are connected to what the young person has done. Some places could even say, well, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to print it out for you. You take it with you, and we'll create a Google Drive, or we'll create a Dropbox, and you can put your information in there. But either way, it's a rolling record of what the young person has done. Inside these tools, there's something for facilitators. There are games that you could play. There are icebreakers, energizers, all of these things that you might be able to do with your young people over the course of the summer. There's also there are a series of plans that really allow you from week 1 to week 6 to know step by step, these are the things that I should be doing. These are the things that my young people should be doing. As Theo said, some of those things are already there on the website. We will be adding 2 new ones this year so that you'll be able to take a look at. And we'll also be walking you through those plans that exist in the digital library. So as we move and round out our time here today, our goal all summer is to be able to provide some level of help, give you some tips. We're here to assist. We can offer guidance, we can offer some support, and we can give you some advice. But it all starts with you asking questions. You can ask us questions here in additional PBL 101s that we offer. We do an abbreviated version that is more of a refresher training. So if there are members of your team who are going to be here, who were here last year, and you want to be like, I just think they just need to come back in and hear it again, they're welcome to do that. And then the two plans that I just referenced, we built a plan that is about healthy communities, and we built one that is about another project that DYCD has built into summer youth employment, and that is called a Pride Project. So there are two plans that'll be on the website in the next couple of weeks that will really allow you to do some additional exploration. Again, so much of this is really about connecting the dots between the issue, the challenge, and the careers that exist within, that are connected to those themes. So healthy communities and SYEP, the Pride Project are all themes that you could lean into, along with, like, there's one about that's there about voter, the census. There's one that's there about safe communities. There's one that's there about healing-centered engagements. So all of these project plans that exist that are already on the website, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you don't want to. But again, like I said, there are elements there that you are more than welcome to pull it apart, make your own plan, and use anything that we've created to kind of help you along the way. All right. And that is what I have. Theo, you have anything else?
I just wanted to reiterate that one of the things that we said over and over again was that, and the term that we used over and over again was your PBL program. At no point did you really hear us talk about PBL as an activity, right? Project-based learning in the aspect of what you're doing is a program. So, like I said, that goes back to the very first moment that young people start to engage with you, and that's arrival, that's logging on, right? That's thinking about transitions, that's thinking about what happens during lunchtime, that talks about the intentionality behind what happens during workshops and things like that, and just being really clear that these are things that just have to happen over the course of the summer. That's all I got. We're going to drop the chat for the chat. The evaluation for the chat has been dropped. The evaluation for the session has been dropped in the chat. It's the title. You can put Provider PBL 101, and the facilitators are Dennis Carter and Theo Phillips. We greatly appreciate your attendance today. And like Dennis said, we'll be offering this 2 more times, as well as along with some refreshers and some other things as well to provide you with training. We look forward to seeing you all throughout the course of the summer. If you have any questions, definitely, like I said, we are going to be using attendance from today to create a contact list. So we'll try and stay in touch with the right people as much as possible. All right. Until we see each other again, my good people, have a good day. Please make sure to do the evaluation. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.